Unbalanced Luck, Book 7 of the Twisted Luck series. Written by Mel Todd. Narrated by Autumn Juliet. Dedication. To John Mersch, thank you for coming into my life, and I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you in person. You made my books better, and my life richer because of you. I will miss your input. Mel Todd. Chapter 1. There are new rumblings out of Congress about changing the draft scheme. Various branches of the military are requesting to be allowed to extend draft service for mages with highly specialized degrees. This was countered by a suggestion to extend all draft terms to a decade, as they are for Merlins. At this time, it is just rumors, but the OMO has remained silent on this issue. CNN Mage Focus. And it is finalized. The houses, the entire street, in fact, are yours, as well as James' remaining assets. Lucille Blanding signed the last piece of paper with a flourish and handed it to me. Let me get you all the deeds, the final accounts, and your keys. It all felt surreal, even if I'd known this was coming. My draft had officially finished a week ago, even with the extra 6 weeks of maternity leave added onto it. It had been a busy few years, and now the culmination of what I'd been waiting for was here. Freedom. Here you go. Lucille slid a folder and a shoebox over to me. I took it a bit numbly. Curious, I opened the folder. Lucille had included a brief summary document with everything I owned and the current value. I choked. Really? Lucille laughed. 2 decades of interest and decent stock markets can make anything look good. You have enough to live on and never have to work again if you don't want to. I'm just glad that all this is no longer my responsibility. I hope you enjoy everything he left you, Cori, and I'm glad you're approaching it a different way. She smiled with the first truly warm smile I'd ever seen from her. Thank you. But I do want to change one thing. I want to sign over this house to Joe and Sable. I pulled the Tudor house deed out and pushed it to her. Lucille smiled at me. That doesn't surprise me. Give me a minute. I need a lawyer and a witness. She made a phone call, and a few minutes later, a real estate lawyer who had an office in the building showed up as a witness. It took a total of 15 minutes to get it witnessed and signed. Thank you again. It has been my pleasure. I hope to see you change the world. I laughed as I rose and headed out of the office. The last thing I had any desire to do was change the world. Caroline stretched, then moved to walk with me from where he'd been waiting in the outer lobby of the small brownstone office complex. Is it done? I reached out to scritch across the top of his head. He leaned into it with a low rumble. It is. I'm officially rich, I guess. It still felt odd not to worry about money. I juggled the folder and the shoebox in my arm. I needed to see what was in it, but now really wasn't the right time.
Joe will be overjoyed. She has lusted greatly over the blocky house.
I fought a snicker. The Tudor house was much bigger than our Victorian, and Joe lusted after it more for the huge garage and workshop it had than anything else. All the tenants of the 4 houses I owned had completed their leases in the last year, and now the houses were empty. They couldn't sit empty for too long, but I didn't know who to put in them. My brother Chris had stayed with us until he emerged, then went off to school. He had about 2 more years before he came home, and would he even want to live here? Or live alone? So many questions to be answered. I shook it off. Want to walk for a bit before we head home?
Yes, that sounds enjoyable. We need to get outside more.
I pulled the leash out of my bag that held his leash, harness, and a collapsible bowl. I slipped the leash and harness on, and we set off for a walk. I wasn't shopping for anything, really. I just wanted to give myself some time before everything settled in. Is there anything you want to do? I mean, there are still parts of the world we haven't seen. I ignored people's glances as we walked. Lucille's office was in a mixed business section of Albany, and we didn't come here often enough for anyone to get used to us. The people in the stores near home didn't even blink an eye at Caroline anymore. Granted, he'd gotten to be in the Christmas parade last year, but I had no idea how many people thought he was real versus a mechanical cat.
I enjoy doing the search and rescue. My nose is much better than any canines.
The arrogance just made me snicker. Better than Dolly's? He huffed and pulled me over to look at a display in a bar window that had a TV pointing at the street. It was advertising a deep-sea fishing trip, and on screen they were pulling up swordfish.
That looks like something excellent to do.
I've never been on a boat. It could be fun. I think we get to keep all the fish we catch. It did look fun, if a bit wet.
I wish to do that. I'm sure fish tastes much better when you have to fight it.
I opened my mouth to say they weren't fighting the fish, but from the back and forth struggle on the screen, it was as good a description as any. I can look into that. Anything else? We would need to go renew certifications and my credentials to do SNR.
I'm willing to prove, again, that I am more intelligent than most humans.
He was arrogant, but he wasn't wrong. The people running the tests for SNR animals didn't seem to understand or remember he had human-level intelligence and were constantly looking at me to give him commands. He found the entire process tedious and rather insulting. A spike of pain splashed through my mind, hard and sharp. Did someone just open a rip? I said it out loud as I turned, trying to figure out what that had been. While I was used to tiny spikes of pain, this one was huge. It had been years since I'd felt anything this strong.
Toward the sun, about 2 stories off the ground. It is an opening to chaos.
Caroline whispered in my mind, pulling me in that direction. I let him pull me as I looked both visually and mentally for the rip. When I finally found it, a shocked gasp escaped me. That is not good.
No, this is not right.
Caroline agreed, his fur rising up with a low growl. Hanging over a 1-story shopping strip, a rip gleamed as a widening gray ripple against a sunny October sky. While the rip was concerning enough, what had me running toward it was the black ribbon-like tentacles that were wiggling out of it as it grew. I could hear the murmurs and gasps as it became large enough that everyone noticed. "Is that Bob?" I asked as we ran. Bob was one of the Lords of Chaos and resembled nothing more than a blob of tar that could move and create tentacles whenever it desired.
I do not believe Bob would ever be this unwise or arrogant.
Caroline sounded hesitant as he loped lazily next to me. Even my sprinting full out couldn't make him actually need to run. Show-off calf. I didn't reply, mainly because I needed my breath to run, and kept moving. It was a big rip. I skidded to a halt at the edge of a block and looked straight up at it. The tentacles were thin and ribbony, whereas usually Bob had thick octopus-like things.
It is not Bob. In fact...
Caroline trailed off, and I glanced down at him, only to have my stress ratcheted up higher as I saw his hackles raised and ears laid back.
It is an incursion.
It's a what's-its? I asked, having never heard that term from anyone. He snarled but spoke quickly in my mind, as if saying the words were distasteful.
An area of chaos accumulated too much magic and is exploding outward, seeking more room to grow. It needs to be lanced and drained for lack of a better word.
So many questions popped into my mind. Can this happen with other realms? Where does the excess magic go? Is this why there were emergent spikes? I pushed all of them back as I heard more sirens and the sound of people freaking out around me. What do I need to do?
Seal the rip. Lancing and draining is part of what the council's for.
I really needed to ask more questions, but every time I did that, I ended up with more things people expected me to fix. Occasionally, ignorance was bliss. That I can do. After opening and sealing a rip into a pocket realm to crash an airplane into, I'd gotten very good at managing them. The rip stood out to my magic like a searing burn on my skin. All I had to do was zip it closed, which was so much easier said than done. Magic fought me. It wasn't like when I was pregnant, when it was sluggish and unresponsive. No, this time it bucked and wiggled, trying to squirm away. It reminded me of playing catch the kitty with Caroline when he was younger. I used the same technique, corralling the magic, forcing it back in, step by step. It didn't want to go, but I used the elements of air and water to block it. They thought it was great fun. If the rip had been closer to the ground, I would have grabbed fire and earth, but as it was, I didn't figure getting the sky on fire would help at all. Sweat poured down my face, and I kept fighting it. There was so much magic. Caroline, can you contact your mother? Get her here to lance or drain it.
Would not Turin be better?
He asked as I leaned on him more and more, now using him to keep myself standing upright. You said it was chaos, and I'm not burning a favor for this unless I have no choice. I gritted the words out. There were still 2 oily ribbons peeking through the gap. I had no idea what would happen if I just cut them off, but that brought an idea. I called lightning and slammed it into the ribbon. There was a shriek that almost brought me to my knees, though if it was a shriek of pain or outrage, I couldn't have said. The tentacle jerked back in, and I slammed the opening shut. The sudden release of the pressure I'd been fighting against sent me reeling backwards, and I hit the pavement with a soft whack. Luckily, I landed on my butt.
See? We didn't need her.
Caroline purred in my mind. I glared at him. What's going on? Normally, you are more than happy to ask your mother to come by. He avoided my gaze, looking behind me.
We have company,
he whispered. We will be talking about this, I hissed, as I twisted around to see who was approaching. 2 cops, and someone in a suit that just screamed official, though what type I didn't know, were approaching us. The police had their hands on their weapons, and the official just looked arrogant. They stopped a few feet away from me. I knew I should stand up to face them, but right then I wasn't sure my legs could support me. Fighting with the rip and that aspect of chaos had exhausted me past anything I'd ever dealt with. Are you responsible for that? Demanded the officious one. Depends on what that you are talking about, I said mildly. And you are? Caroline moved behind me and laid down, creating a backrest. I sagged back against him. At this point, I just wanted to go home. Special Agent Jake Arnold, FBI. He said that in a snooty, officious voice. You know that using magic like that and opening the rips to other realms can be treated as a criminal offense? The 2 cops next to him tensed, and I didn't blame them. Arresting mages was always a risky proposition. Good thing for them, I wasn't a criminal and wasn't about to run or make their lives more difficult. Excellent. By the way, I'm Cori Munroe. I lifted the hair away from my face so they could see my double marks, then reached into my bag to pull out my phone. I hit the speed dial for Steven Alexant. He had been promoted to Senior Director of the FBI Magical Task Force and reported directly to the head of the FBI. The director of the FBI was a federally appointed position, but about 3 years ago, they'd created Steven's position to oversee all magical crime investigations. Hey, Cori, what's up? His voice came out tinny through my phone. "Steven, I'm putting you on speaker. Will you please tell the nice officers and Special Agent Jake Arnold that I'm not the bad guy?" I flipped it to the speaker and held it out to them. The tone and timbre of his voice changed, and for a minute I wished I could see him.
"This is FBI Magical Crimes Senior Director Steven Alexant. What is going on there?"
It wasn't so much a question as a barked-out demand for information.
Sir, can I, ask for verification of your identity?"
The agent stuttered while the two cops relaxed a bit, but their eyes kept jumping between Caroline and me, unsure as to who was the bigger threat.
"Check your phone,"
Steven snapped out. The agent jumped as his phone went off and he pulled it out, paling at what he saw there.
"Is that enough validation for you?"
asked Steven, though I knew he was a tiny bit impressed the agent had requested verification.
"Sir, yes, sir,"
he snapped out.
"Good. Munroe, tell me what in blazes is going on there."
There were people gathering around us, and I winced. "It might be a better idea for us to go somewhere not quite as public as this currently is," I said, giving Jake a hard look. He shook himself, looked around. I saw red creeping up his neck.
"That might be wise.
He looked at the police officers helplessly, and I swear I saw them roll their eyes. 15 minutes later, we were in one of the satellite station's interrogation rooms with a video conference connection to Steven. I at least had been able to stop and get a very large iced coffee for me, and water and a tray of sashimi for Caroline. I poured the water into his bowl. I kept one collapsed in his harness storage. Then I unwrapped the sashimi for him. The cellophane gave him nothing but trouble, then focused on my icy goodness of a treat.
"Now, what is going on?"
Steven was back in his officious, "I am the boss" mode, and I glared at him from the corner of my eyes. He quirked a corner of his mouth up at me, but didn't change anything else. Jake and the cop that had stayed both turned their eyes to me.
"We'll let the Merlin explain. In other words, you have no idea what happened?"
Steven asked. No one responded, and he turned to look at me. I took a long sip of my iced coffee, trying to organize my thoughts. I was walking down the street when I felt a rip form. Jake interrupted me.
"What do you mean, felt a rip form?"
It looked like I'd get to do mage education too. Jake wasn't a mage, neither was the cop that had stayed here to listen. I fought back a sigh. Teaching would never be something I enjoyed. It was probably a character flaw, but there it was. I'm a double Merlin. One of the aspects of how I sense magic is that when rips form near me, I feel them appear like a spike of pain through my skull. They are not common in public areas, so when I felt it, I looked around. That was at least a white lie. They tended to be common in my life, but not out in public like that.
"Okay, then what?"
I described racing toward it, then, highlighting the fact that Indira Humbert had trained me, I explained trying to close it. I talked about the thing trying to come out and using water, air, and a bit of lightning to discourage that action.
"Do you know what was coming through the rip? And know that we have already alerted the OMO."
Jake said this as if it was supposed to scare or intimidate me. The OMO was the Office of Magical Oversight, and they acted as the monitor and regulator for most magic. But mostly, they were toothless outside of testing and registration. It wasn't like they could affect the fact that my draft was over or how powerful I was. No? Nope. I think it might have been a chaos denizen, or even just magic manifesting, but I have no way of knowing for sure. And, okay, I don't know what the OMO can do besides record that it happened. I went back to my iced coffee, wishing I'd grabbed two.
"What happened when you chased it back in, assuming that is what you did?"
His voice held more than a hint of accusation, but I ignored it. I shrugged. I closed the rift, and it wasn't as easy as it should have been. I ran my hand down my arm. Most rifts I can close with a few strands. This one cost me almost 1/8 of an inch of hair. That rift was very determined to remain open. Jake opened his mouth to say something stupid probably, but Steven spoke first with a shocked tone.
It cost you that much to get it closed?
That and convince those tentacles to go back inside. I shrugged. They were reaching hard for something.
You?
I laughed at Jake. No, they were nowhere near me. If I had to guess, toward freedom. But I'm not exactly an expert at this.
What about him?
Jake stabbed a finger at Caroline. Caroline wasn't happy with the small room and decided the best way to protect me was to lie across the base of the door. I wasn't sure anyone could force it open if he decided to not let it move. Feel free to ask him, I said, leaning back and watching Jake pale. Caroline yawned, laying his ears back and looking like the vicious predator he could be. Alexis sighed.
Caroline, do you know anything about what that was?
I know many things, but other than chaos, it was a thing, but not in the way you understand beings.
He licked his paw as his mind spoke in mine and the others. Jake went even paler, and I wondered if he was going to pass out, but he managed to speak somehow.
What does that mean? It was a thing?
The answer to his question was one I wanted also, so I just waited to see what Caroline would say. It took him a bit as he licked one claw, then another, and I wondered if he was thinking or stalling for time.
The best explanation I can give you is that was the chaos equivalent of a tornado. Not really alive, but with properties and actions that seem as if it had a purpose or agenda.
That made an odd sort of sense to me, and I nodded. Didn't make it any easier to deal with, but it not being a direct act did make it feel a bit less directed at me. The room was quiet for a full 3 heartbeats as we all digested this.
Very well,
Steven said from the video screen.
Is there anything else that happened?
The cop shrugged, and Jake looked a bit flummoxed. Not really. I'd like to go home and think about it, I mentioned, figuring Steven would understand that I needed to check with a few non-humans about it. But I didn't see any damage caused by it, just from people freaking out. There were a few stammered protests from Jake, but even he had to admit nothing had happened. I managed to get out in another 20 minutes after giving my statement, and Steven promising to get in touch with me soon. I collected my belongings. Nothing looked like it had been touched. I walked outside, Caroline leaning against me. I knew my actions would be scrutinized, so I called for a rideshare and took the long way home. That was okay. It gave me time to think. By the time we got back to Hamadia, I decided that I really needed to talk to Esmir or Turin and figure out what that was about. Plus, what was up with Caroline and Esmir? The thought was taken away from me as I walked into the house, and sitting in the middle of the floor in the entry was Esmir.
Cori, the council requires your attendance immediately.
Chapter 2. The rip that occurred in downtown Albany today wasn't the first, as many people want to believe. We have evidence that this has been happening worldwide, and the government is hiding it from us. Don't believe what they are telling you. The mages aren't saving us when they close these rips. Who do you think created them? Mages, of course. Join the cause and force the government to make magic use unconstitutional. Freedom from magic. I blinked at her. Good afternoon to you also. I moved past her to hang up my small bag, still holding everything else. Joe and Sable would pick the kids up from school in 30 minutes. I was supposed to start dinner. It might be a sandwich night.
Cori, this is important.
Unless it is about the incursion this morning, it isn't as important as you think. Either way, I'm going to go pee, change my clothes, put this away, and then I'll go see the council. As I talked, I headed to the stairs.
Incursion? What incursion?
Her worried mental voice bounced around in my head as I reached my study. I placed the papers and the box on the desk and resisted the desire to go through it. It looked like that would have to wait.
There was an incursion in the town earlier. Cori stopped it.
The amount of pride in Carolian's voice almost made me blush. The iced coffee demanded to be let out, and I agreed. After that was taken care of, I stripped off the slacks and blouse I was wearing, pulling on jeans and a comfortable Henley in dark green, and slipping on hiking boots. Every time I wore sandals or heels into the realms, I regretted it. I took a minute to pull out my phone and text Joe and Sable. Esmere here, dragging me to council. Panini's okay? While I waited for a response, I put my hair back up into something neater and wiped my face. Dried sweat felt icky. Got it. Don't torture them too much. Joe sent back with a laughing emoji. I headed back downstairs, feeling a bit more comfortable, though not particularly happy. They'd had decided to cut me out of the conversation, so when I got back to the entry, there were two Cath, glaring at each other, tails lashing. Do I need to give you two some alone time? I asked archly, even as a niggling doubt burrowed into my soul. In all the time I'd known them both, I'd never seen them fight like this, and I couldn't help but feel it was regarding me.
No, we have to leave. Callie and I will solve it at a later point.
Esmere looked at me, her eyes almost glowing. I didn't know if that was her emotions or magic. He is coming with me. It wasn't a question.
Of course he is,
she replied, glancing back at me with ears laid back.
Oh, Cori, Later. We will explain it later.
I knew it had been about me. Fine, but we will deal with it later. She nodded, flicking her tail at me, which I knew meant she would avoid it as long as possible. Cath did not like to be forced into anything. She stepped through the rip she created to the other realm, and I followed her. Every other time I'd gone to the council, it had been like walking into a social hour. Then everyone settled down. This time, it felt like walking into a bar brawl. Magic snapped at the end of Bean's limbs. Fire spurted into the air while some parts of the council chamber were snowing, and a mini twister spun around a Valkyrie. I blinked, the noise almost overwhelming.
Enough!
Brix's voice blew through my mind and cut through the noise, leaving me fighting the desire to throw up. It had hurt that much.
The Herald of Magic is here, as we requested, though much delayed.
There was a note of censor in Brix's voice that let my irritation push down my nausea. I wandered over to Shay and Amadahi. They stood almost shoulder to shoulder, glaring at everyone. I didn't see Hisahito. Hey, I said with a nod of my head. Any idea what's going on? The two of them exchanged a quick glance, while Caroline wrapped around my feet.
They'll tell you in a second. Just remember, this wasn't our choice or thought. They have a hard-on for you,
Shay said with an irreverent grin. Amadahi slammed her staff down, just missing his foot.
That is crude and unhelpful. We will talk afterward, Marilyn Monroe.
Her voice was very formal when she addressed me. I preferred Shay's insouciance. Everyone was settling down, though I noticed there were a lot more spectators than the last time I'd been here.
Marilyn Monroe, your suggested lord has missed this session. We have waited for him, but he has not appeared. How are you going to fix this?
I looked at the Rainbow Phoenix, then at the two humans. Really? This is the awful emergency? They both nodded, looking exasperated.
Apparently, no one ever misses a meeting. They are up in arms as he is 2 hours late.
The desire to imitate my familiar and hiss and stalk off in a huff very nearly became a reality. A few things. 1, I am not responsible for him. He is an adult and is capable of managing his own life. 2, did it occur to you he might be sick? Or there is something that he has to deal with right now? 3, for Merlin's sake, has anyone called him? All of the beings just looked at me. After what seemed like an eternity, Brick spoke.
You mean injured in a fight?
No, I mean sick. Cold, flu, measles, mumps, I don't know. Maybe just allergies. He also could have been in an accident, or maybe there was something he was in the middle of that he couldn't drop. Humans have jobs and responsibilities. We don't just get to do what we want. Others can tell us what to do. For all I know, he's in jail for drunk and disorderly. Has anyone checked in on him? Again, that silence, and I wanted to beat my head on the stone floor. It might help. I turned to Shay and Amadahi. Seriously, do either of you have his phone number? They both looked at me and shrugged. I sighed. I could ask Tiateng, the Empress Shishi's dragon familiar, but there was an easier way. Georgaz! I called out. Georgaz had been James Wells' familiar, the man who had left all the houses and the money to me. He also knew Hisahiro and didn't particularly like him, but he knew him. A minute later, there was a poof of flame in front of me, and Georgaz flapped his wings, sending wafts of flame around him.
Cori?
He sounded confused as he looked around.
What is going on? Land! The Herald has a request of you.
Brix ordered. The feathers on Georgaz bristled, and I got the distinct impression those two did not get along. But he settled on the perch that flowed up from the council floor. While he settled himself, I looked around. The usual suspects were here, and no one had ever replaced the wall Brix blew out for Smog to talk to everyone, leaving it open to a grassy area that held some larger spectators. Some of the lords seemed to have changed, or at least the hypnohawk was gone. Instead, there was a fox with too many tails sitting in the spirit area. Tursane was there as usual. I flashed her a smile, and she nodded, her snakes hissing and bouncing up and down. She was a regular dinner guest, and the twins loved her. Georgaz had settled down, his back to Brix in an obvious move. I did my best not to laugh. The more alien they were, the more they were just like humans.
Yes, I dislike dealing with the council.
There was a snort.
You're just mad I ascended to this position, not you.
Brix sounded horribly snooty, and I shot the bird a look. Do you want this dealt with, or do you want to snipe at each other? If you want to snipe, please feel free, and I'll go home and do what I need to while you act like my kids. That wasn't inaccurate. They were in the, "Mom, she's touching me" phase, and all three of us were tired of it. Esmere choked back a chuff of laughter as I glared at the two birds. They were both at least in their 2nd century, and I didn't feel like dealing with them.
Cori, did you need something?
Georgaz addressed me, as if the rest of the council didn't exist. I understood that sentiment. Georgaz, Hisahiro hasn't shown up for this meeting, and we both know that is not like him. Would you find him and inquire as to why he has not attended? Georgaz fluffed his feathers, cocking his head to look at me.
You know I do not care for him.
I smiled. I know, but I think you enjoy chewing on him. And if you do, I'll make your berry lemon treat this weekend. Georgaz had a major sweet tooth and loved various berries mixed with lemon juice and honey. He'd eat it until he burst if he could.
That sounds like a reasonable exchange. Hold.
He launched himself off the post and disappeared in a fiery poof.
Show off.
Brix's voice was unmistakable, but I turned to the other two humans, ignoring the council leader. What is going on? Why in the world am I getting dragged here because someone is late? Shay had settled down into a chair, while Amadahi had a stool she perched on.
There was agitation present when we arrived.
We have never met outside of here, so we never thought to exchange contact information," Amadahi said with her formal phrasing.
What she said. No clue what has their feathers and a twist, but the magic feels strange today.
Shay waved his left hand around his reddish-orange hair in a circle.
We were told the meeting was about incursions today, but no one wants to explain what that means.
My body went still, and I pivoted to find Esmere thoroughly cleaning a hind paw, as if her life depended on it. "I believe there is something that needs to be explained," I said in slow, hard tones. She flinched at each word, and Caroline curled into a ball, trying to look inconspicuous.
"Malkin, tell them."
Caroline's voice was soft, but urging, and I started to think this was what had caused the rift between the two of them. I didn't know if that made me feel better or not.
"Peace, Caroline and Esmir. I will accept responsibility."
Turin spoke before either of them could say any more, and I could almost see the stress bleed off Esmir. That alone worried me. I don't think I've ever seen a Cath that had any amount of stress. Excitement, eagerness, fear, even worry or trepidation, but never stress. Turin, what is going on? I turned toward the Gorgon, smiling at the snakes, and managed to control the shudder as the tattooed one on my arm wiggled the littlest bit in greeting. It had been years, but it still felt wrong in the worst way. She inhaled, and I laughed as Shay's eyes drifted to her chest.
"The council ordered the other lords to not say anything to anyone that isn't on the council."
She smirked.
"They are welcome to remove my mantle if they wish, but due to the favor I provided you, I have more magic than most."
Her smile faltered for a second there, but then she forced her smile wider.
"And as it affects all of us, I don't have any issue telling you."
I crossed my arms and waited. I saw Brooks pivot our way with wings raised, the ring of office on his leg glinting, and I just knew the featherhead was going to butt in. An exploding wave of flames appeared above the perch, and I glanced to see Georgas settling himself down. I had rather expected a smug, full-of-himself phoenix, happy to have caught Hisahiro in something. Instead, he sat with his feathers slicked down and his wings held tight to his body. "Georgas, what is wrong?" I asked, my voice loud enough to cut through the chatter in the room. It went silent, and every being there, even those without eyes, focused on us. He lifted his head, even the colors seeming somehow muted, to look at me.
"He is in a hospital. The woman with him said he had a massive heart attack, and they did surgery to fix his heart. He will be unable to talk for another day or more, as they have a tube down his throat breathing for him."
Silence hung in the air, as all of us digested that. I took a breath. "There you have it. He's ill. I'm sure he'll be back when he can. Until then, you have two very capable Merlins here to help you." I waved at Shay and Amadahi, who didn't look all that capable at the moment. They looked shocked and overwhelmed. "Enjoy the council, you two. I'm headed home. I have family stuff to do." There was an outburst of chatter, and Brix's voice overrode all of them.
"The Herald must stay and fill out the council."
I turned and looked at them. "The Herald needs to go home. You'll live one meeting with only 2 Earth Merlins. This is called life. Adapt." I shot a look at Turin and Esmir. They both gave me the smallest of nods. "Caroline, let's go home."
"Gladly."
Before anyone else could protest or stop us, I stepped through the rip Caroline made and went home. Chapter 3. Seeking information exchange for research into the rips. I'm a Chaos Merlin seeking a Spirit Merlin to investigate the rips. I have information and have a contact with the OMO that is providing data about these extraplanar incursions. Terms to be discussed. House of Emrys Board. We walked into the kitchen from the rip so I could start making dinner. Do you want to explain exactly what is going on between you and Esmir? I kept my voice neutral, but it still worried me. He threw himself on the floor in a picture-perfect version of teenage moping.
She knows something is going on that could affect both Earth and you personally. But she won't tell you because of the rules. And I'm not happy with anything that puts my queens at risk.
There was a long pause. Then he continued.
And frustrated, my Malkin is putting stupid council rules over family.
That explained a lot, and I resisted the urge to go pet him. I just washed my hands. And that is what Turin was going to tell me? I glanced at the clock, 3:30, and got my butt into gear. I pulled out chicken and set about making a simple chicken casserole. Chicken, rice, cream of cheese soup, frozen veggies, and cheese. The kids loved it, the adults tolerated it, and I had a hard time screwing it up.
I assume so. I do not like secrets.
I snorted. You love secrets. You just don't like them being kept from you.
There might be some truth in that statement,
he admitted. I finished getting dinner ready, then settled down in the study to go over the paperwork. Caroline decided to go lay outside in the yard, enjoying the fall day. It still seemed unreal, even if I'd been working toward this for years. The Tudor house and the craftsman were mine. A pang shot through me as I realized this meant Joe and Sable would be leaving. That idea caused too much conflicting emotions, and I pushed it away. The craftsman was the first house on the street, and right now I didn't know what I would do with it. Renting it out didn't sound like the right thing to do. But what? Giving up on the paperwork and decisions I couldn't make right now, I pulled the box over to me and broke the seal. Inside were a few jewelry cases containing 2 men's rings, a necklace with what looked like a ruby, and one with a pink gold gem in a trilliant cut, 2 Patek watches, and a small notebook. I sighed and added it to my to-be-read pile. I heard the door opening downstairs and laid everything aside to go greet my family. I made it to the bottom of the stairs before I got hit with twin missiles that reached my waist. Good afternoon! How was school? Maine looked up at me and grinned. His tight, curly black hair and a low braid sparkled in the light. Dark eyes and white teeth gleamed up at me. It was fun, but can I get a dog? I want a dog. Please? Caroline didn't react, so I assumed he hadn't heard Maine's comment from outside. I heard Joe groan, but didn't look away from the kids. And you, Jazz? She was wrapped around me tighter, not looking up, her fluffy hair hiding her face. School is stupid. I don't want to go. That did concern me, and I glanced at Joe even while I had my arms around the 2 5-year-olds. She sighed and just waved her hand, signifying we'd talk about it later. I hugged Jazz. Sounds like you've had a busy day. Proof that everyone had made it through an exhausting day solidified as Sable came home about then and looked absolutely wiped. But if you go change and play for a bit, then we can eat dinner and I can tell everyone the big news. Jazz jerked her head up to peer at me, her fluffy hair moving with her. All of us were waiting for it to grow out a bit more, then we could get it braided. Good news? It sounded oddly hopeful, and I took my finger and pushed the end of her nose. Beep. I guess you'll have to decide, won't you? She giggled, and they raced upstairs to change. They were still sharing the one room, something else that would change if or when they moved to the Tudor house. I knew we had about 7 minutes for the twins to climb the stairs, change, and get back down here. What's up? I asked, looking at Jo while I moved over to give Sable a hug. She leaned into it, sighing. No friends at school. There are only 2 girls in her grade and they are besties, so she's feeling a bit isolated. While Maine is excited that Bobby is with him and a new kid that seems to share their love of mud, bikes, and collecting super familiars. I laughed at that. It was a game where you went around finding super familiars and capturing them on your mobile device. Caroline was miffed that anyone believed that a familiar would deign to allow themselves to be captured. They were both in pre-K, but Bobby Freeman lived not too far from us, and they had met on a park outing and become best friends. Maine was stocky, spoke clearly, if quickly, with skin the color of dark chocolate. We kept his curly hair in tight braids out of self-preservation. Any looser, and it just wasn't practical. He was way too active. Bobby, on the other hand, was lanky, with blonde hair and blue eyes. He wore glasses with lenses an inch thick and spoke with a lisp. Jazz didn't like Bobby, mostly because he was willing to roll in the mud and run around with Maine, where she liked doing art, reading their books, or playing with her dolls. Until this last year, she and her twin had been joined at the hip. But after starting pre-K, Maine had started hanging out with more kids, while she still hadn't found any real friends. Partially because she preferred her own company to anyone else's, but the lack of other kids she liked in the class didn't help. The twins came racing down the steps, and I winced at the sound they made, but Hamadia hadn't complained yet. I think she loved the life they brought with them. "Can we go out and play?" Maine asked. He had one of his toy trucks in his hand. It had been the last present from Henry he'd received. Just seeing it made a wave of sadness hit me. When the twins were 4, Henry had a massive heart attack in his garage. He died before anyone had found him. Marisol had been on him to retire, and he'd grudgingly agreed to hand over the day-to-day business to Marco and Sanchez as co-managers, with the idea of it being their inheritance. Instead, he died at 66, leaving it all to them. It still hurt, and Marisol still seemed slightly broken, and we didn't know how to help. "It is May we, and you have an hour, then dinner," Jo told them. They scampered out the back door before she finished speaking. The backyard was safe, as Hamadia always kept an eye on them. Where I'd blasted the earth and created a spring, we put in a fountain. They had a slide and swing set back there as well. "You two look exhausted." I scanned both of them. Sable was missing at least an inch of hair since this morning, and Jo had rings under her eyes. "It was a day. We had issues with the prototype processing, and I had to keep 2 of them from shattering and create 3 new ones on the fly." Sable looked ready to drop. She worked for a small company that created water filtration systems for specific needs, and right now they'd been working on something for deep ocean drilling and had to get something that could extract the salt from the water, handle the pressure, and do it without requiring electricity. It was a fascinating project. Jo pulled us both into a hug. "Ditto. Everything at the machine shop went wonky today, and I still have 2 custom bikes that won't run right, and I have no idea why." I hugged them both. "Go. Dinner is in the oven. I'll start a salad, and we can talk then." They headed to their room, and I settled down in the sunroom to watch the kids and think. I'd only been there a few minutes when Caroline showed up. "As we aren't talking about the council drama yet, any thoughts about what you'd like to do? We still have decades in front of us. We don't have to only do things we've done before. We talked about S&R." It wasn't just an idle question. There were lots of options, but my life was richer when Caroline was part of it.
I am still in favor of resuming the search and rescue, though perhaps not full time. But is there a reason you can't take a vacation for a while? I think you push too hard. Deep-sea fishing sounds like an excellent vacation.
He sprawled out at my feet, tail twitching. I laughed. Maybe. My phone rang before I could follow up on anything. Though I did like the sound of doing the S and R again. It would help keep me in shape, and I still had contacts. Hey, Steven. How's Indira? After all these years, his name didn't hurt anymore. It also helped that I never called him Stevie.
She's good. Wants to come see you, but is caught up in a rush order right now.
Indira did custom circuitry chips using her chaos abilities to manipulate atoms for nanotechnology. It paid very well, but it was exhausting and used up lots of resources. She made about 5 chips a month, and they went for mid-6 figures every time. Ah, well, you know where we are. What's up? I knew darn well he was calling about the incident this afternoon, but no need to volunteer when I didn't know what he was looking for.
You said you had to struggle a bit to close the rip. Is that unusual?
I thought about it. Yes and no. Most rips aren't that big. When I run into random ones, they are like 6 to 10 inches. And the one big rip I closed, I also created. Given that information, I'm not sure I have much experience to base on my answer. Indira would know more. Indira had been the one to teach me to close rips, so I figured she'd know more.
We've talked about it. She said the largest she's closed that she didn't create was about 13 feet. It was a bit more difficult, but not enough to worry about. The mages guarding Area 51 have never tried to close them, so you probably have more experience than most.
Area 51 held 3 static rips, 1 to each realm. All the information about it was restricted, so that was as much as most people knew. Why are you asking? He was silent for a long moment.
I'll explain later. Thanks, Cori.
And with that, he hung up, leaving me staring at my phone. The timer for the casserole went off. I called the kids in, roused Joe and Sable, who had fallen asleep, and got everyone seated and served. Caroline opted out of eating and lay on the window seat in the dining room. This not working thing might not be too bad. Maybe I could take cooking lessons and actually learn to cook. Italian or Cajun could be fun. So, what's the big news? Joe's question pulled me back to the table from my mental wanderings. I signed everything today. The houses are ours. Everyone looked at me for a long moment. Then Joe did a slow smile. The Tudor house is yours? I shook my head. Nope. I waited, enjoying the confusion on their faces. It's been signed over to you and Sable. It's your house. The look of shock on Joe and Sable's face made me laugh. Cori, you didn't have to... Joe started, and I waved my hand. I don't need the money from renting it. I have no desire to sell it, and you have lusted after it from day one, and you and the kids get everything anyhow. Why not? And I meant all of that. It was just a house, and I rather loved this one. I don't know what to say, Sable stammered. I saw their eyes shining at the idea of their own place, even as my heart cringed at the idea of them leaving. Does this mean we're moving? Can we get a dog? Maine asked. Caroline's ears laid back, and he hissed, but didn't lift up his head.
Why would you want one of those ugly, stupid things in the house?
His ears perked up.
Unless you want to buy one as a treat for me. I don't suppose they would be much work to hunt, but they might taste good. I could use a snack that is interesting.
Ew! Maine's look of disgust had the 3 of us turning to hide our smiles and fight the gales of laughter threatening.
No! As a pet!
The huff of disgust from Caroline didn't help my attempt to not burst out laughing.
Why would you want a pet? They cannot talk to you or help you, and they make you clean up their mess. It was bad enough you went through that stage. To have a creature that never gets past it? No. But everyone else has pets,
he whined as he said it, but dropped the tone as Joe gave him a hard look. Whining was not permitted.
And,
Caroline replied,
having a familiar is an honor. Having a pet is simply being a farmer of a creature who makes nothing of value. Besides, you have the dragons waiting for you.
I kept my face buried in one hand. Caroline had a way of putting things that was both logical and completely wrong.
But they are never gonna hatch.
This time he was borderline whining. "Excuse me," Jo said, her tone arched. By this point, I had to cup both hands over my face, looking down at my plate. Starting to giggle would have ruined everything, and everyone would have probably joined in. Maines sat up a bit straighter. "Sorry, Mama. He trailed off and stared mournfully at his plate. "I think there's something more than just wanting a pet here, isn't there?" Sable said. She kept her eyes on him and waited.
"Maybe."
He didn't look up.
"He's being a poopy pants,"
Jazz said, then cowered under the glares of 3 adults. "What are the rules?" Jo said, her voice flat.
"No calling names,"
she whispered, starting to pout.
"And what is the punishment for that?"
Jo just watched her.
"I have to do all his chores tonight."
Her pout grew larger. "Wonderful. Now that Maine doesn't have any chores tonight, maybe he will feel like telling us what brought all this on." Jo shifted her attention to Maine, while Sable gave him a one-armed hug.
"Everyone brings their pets to school next week. Hamsters, dogs, cats. It's school pet day, and I don't have anything to bring. But Bobby's going to bring his new puppy."
That shed a lot more light on it. Jazz opened her mouth to say something, but snapped it shut when she saw me watching her. "Who says it has to be your pet? I'm sure most animals are the family pets. It would be awfully hard for a kid to take the pet to the vet, buy food, take it for walks," I said mildly, ignoring the alarmed looks from Jo and Sable. Maine's head jerked up, eyes wide. Then he frowned.
"But Caroline isn't a pet. Neither is Esmere. They're peoples."
I could have hugged him right then. Instead, I let him see my smile of pride. "Absolutely. But Caroline is an animal according to most humans. I'm sure he could be persuaded to parade around a classroom for a day."
"You are you? I do not know about that,"
he said, his voice dry, but he jumped off the window seat to rub against Maine's leg.
"But I dislike seeing you sad." "You're the bestest, Gary."
He rubbed Caroline's head, who ignored the nickname. "But," he sucked in a breath,
"you is people. People aren't pets, so I'm not ever going to say you are. I'll wait. But if the dragons ever hatch, I'm bringing them. Maybe they'll breathe fire on Lindsay."
Chatter had just started up when Tursane pinged me.
"Cori, I have need to talk to you. May I come over?"
Chapter 4. Security status. Sensitive. RIPS. Data is being collected and most countries are participating. Under no circumstances should any information slip out that this has been occurring for years, and it is just now happening in publicly visible areas and in a volume that makes it obvious to the populace. Research is ongoing as to why, and there is a supposition that the sudden decline in subpar mages that would be phased out under most countries' law is linked. However, while the data seems to have a correlation, this does not guarantee causation, and all avenues of research should be continued. Internal OMO memo. I sighed and looked at everyone. Tursane is coming over. I paused as the kids could squeal in excitement. "Is there a reason?" Jo asked as she finished her dinner. "Council stuff. I suspect I'm going to find out what Esmere was ordered not to tell me." Someone ordered Esmere to do something? And she listened? Sable's eyes were wide as she stared at me. "I guess so. Caroline is mad at her, and she has avoided talking to me about it. Maybe Tursane will shed some light on it." Can you give us 15? We need to clean up and put the kids to bed. Would you like anything to eat or drink? I asked Turin as I rose, starting to bust the dishes.
Of course, and not tonight. I shall go home and feast when this is done. The council session was exhausting.
The odd pause before exhausting worried me, but I didn't react. We'll see you shortly. I turned back to the important stuff, getting the kids settled in or bribed to chill out, the kitchen cleaned, and mentally prepared for Turin, plus whatever news she might bring. Turin appeared in the backyard. Most of the time, visitors didn't step directly into the house unless it was important or overly awkward to get to me. Banyarl didn't navigate house stairs easily with wings, so he would step straight to my study. I opened up the back door as she slithered in, the green hoodie she'd absconded with years ago gracing her upper body. That hoodie is looking a bit worn. We've given you new ones. Why don't you wear those? I said as we went into the living room. Joe and Sable were there, while the kids had been bribed with watching a cartoon series upstairs, with the promise they could come down to see Turin and her snakes before she left. They adored her. She petted the arms of her hoodie possessively.
I like this one. It is fuzzy.
I can find another polar fleece one. I can get them in different colors so you can wear them on different days. Surely not all areas of the realm remain a balmy temperature. There was a big beanbag in the corner, and she headed for that. I sank into my recliner while Joe and Sable broke off their conversation where they were curled up on the couch.
Not all of them, no,
Turin admitted. She kept petting the arms of the hoodie as we arranged ourselves.
That might be interesting. I have had multiple beings mention they liked it,
she said slowly, her voice thoughtful. Oh, I'm so getting you real clothes for Christmas, Joe said, her eyes glittering. She was still the clothes horse of all of us. Better watch it, Turin, or she's going to addict you to clothes too, Sable teased. Jazz took after Joe in that arena. The more clothes, the better. Caroline sauntered in a minute later and sat next to me, chin on the armrest, demanding pets. Turin, what is going on? I asked, my left hand rubbing Caroline's ears to his pleasure. Her snakes that had previously been bouncing around and hissing softly drooped and then curled up into tight coils on her head. Her face went to the stony beauty that prevented any emotion from slipping through.
Brix does not feel you should be told if you are not a counselor, and tried to impart what you would call an NDA clause on us. I refused, but Bob said none of his lords would mention it.
Ah, I said. I couldn't see Esmere listening to Brix, but Bob? Yes. He was probably the only being, besides the two upstairs, that could get her to do something she didn't want to do. And you feel I should know? Joe and Sable were listening, their eyes focused on Turin, holding hands tightly. A pang of worry slashed through my heart. What if this was more trouble my very existence was bringing their way?
Yes, I am older than, well, the other seniors. Bob and Salastra are older than me, and I believe Brix is very old, but most of the others aren't, and unless Brix wants to challenge me, censoring me will just free up my time.
Turin shrugged, the elegance of it slightly foiled by the fuzzy hoodie.
They will have to live with my decisions, and I with my actions.
I sensed a strange connotation to the word challenge. You're making me nervous, I said, suddenly wishing for tea or a hard drink. Whatever this was, it didn't sound good.
Ah, yes. Here is the crux of it. Magic is bursting at the seams. Our birth rates are down, meaning fewer beings to breathe in the magic. The magic that is coming to me from your ineligible mages I've been pumping into the realms because I can't hold it all. Even Salistra's quit whining because I'm dumping as much into her as I am Bob. And through them, they dump it into their realms. I didn't think we could overfill them. But we have.
I knew Turin had still been getting magic from all the mages that would be killed here on Earth because they couldn't manage their powers. The fact that she was getting that much magic surprised me. I see. So what didn't Brix want me to know? Nothing that she had said sounded like anything I could change.
All that magic is why there are more and more rips into your world. At first, they were small ones, but now they are getting bigger. They also aren't getting closed fast enough to prevent things from creeping in. Beings that normally would never have the power or ability to come through on their own. Plants, insects, even animals. Brix says you are a key to it one way or the other, but keeps stating that you are not ready for this level of responsibility. And what made me refuse to agree is that this was stated prior to your council members showing up, so they know nothing of this or your role in it.
My mouth moved with no sound coming out. Joe and Sable just stared, their eyes wide. Do you realize how insane that sounds? Tursane's snakes wiggled.
Which part? Too much magic or you being key to this issue?
The absorbing it part. Not only does it sound insane, it isn't even a thing. And even if it was, you're a demigod. I'm human. If you can't handle it, how in the world am I supposed to? Tursane went very quiet, looking down at the ground, but her face remained that mask. Tursane? I asked. I could almost feel the huge anvil of fate hanging over my head.
Do you remember Banyar teaching you the most of our magic users are full users? As how I can use all the branches of magic at full strength, and how odd we find the fracturing of magic users only being able to use some parts of it?
I glanced at Joe and Sable, trying to remember. That was over a decade ago. Sable answered first.
Yes, Banyar talked about it, and it is why they found Cori so interesting. As a double Merlin, she's closer to being a true user, like what your denizens are.
Tursane nodded.
Cori, have you ever been tested after Frey told you the truth about your twin? About his death?
Just her saying the words shoved a sharp spurt of grief through my heart. But it faded quickly. His death was part of me, and nothing I could change. No. Why would I have been? Her face didn't change, but her snakes hiding their heads and trying to pull the hoodie up over them said loads.
You emerged again when you had your explosion of grief and anger upon finding out about your twin.
She spoke in a soft, almost comforting tone. I blinked, thinking back to that day. It was almost 6 years ago, as it had been before the twins were born. The realization that I had killed Stevie when I pulled all the magic into me had caused something to snap in me, and I exploded. Literally and figuratively. It was why we had a fountain in the backyard now. I'm not sure what that means, I said slowly, even as my gut tightened. Tursane sighed and the serene mask she wore slipped.
It means you have full access to all branches and all classes. You are, for all intents and purposes, the Herald of Magic. Or as your people knew the previous one, Merlin.
The knowledge that I'd maybe realized, though not acknowledged, hit me like a gut punch and air oofed out of me. My hands shook as I tried to reconcile the nauseous idea of being the most powerful mage on Earth. I was fervently glad my draft service was over. Me being a double Merlin had been seen as an oddity, and yes, I was a bit more powerful, but I'd never really shared with my supervisors exactly what I could do. shifting a lot of my ability onto Caroline. Over the years, 1 or 2 people had come up with the great idea of using him to do things. He'd usually ignored them or just stepped away. One idiot had tried punishment on him in the form of an electric prod. He'd needed 33 stitches, and Caroline had disappeared from a locked room. No one had ever tried that again. But this explained why things were even easier after the twins were born. I'd just assumed it was the rebound from fighting to use my magic for 6 months, and my perceptions were out of sync. "You're telling us that Cori is Merlin reincarnated?" Sable said incredulously. Turin laughed at this, the first relaxed sound I'd heard from her today, and it helped me center.
No, if there is reincarnation, I've never had it proven to me. She is simply on the same power levels. There have been a few before, but she is the most recent.
Recent? Can you name some others? Joe leaned forward, eyes intent.
Oh, let's see. Solomon.
Turin frowned as if trying to remember and recite the state capitals.
Quiliane, Enoch, Gilgamesh. Zenobia was the last one before the undoing. There were a few, but we are talking over thousands of your years, and none of them after Merlin. And he was an oddity. He only managed as he was born in the realms. His mother was brought there by a lord. Since the undoing, you are the first human born on Earth to have become a herald.
I could see Joe wanted to ask more questions, but I needed to know something else. So, what does this mean? What does that have to do with the magic in the realms and the rips? What does it matter that I'm the herald? You've called me that for years. The lump lodged in my throat sat there, and I was unsure if it would be swallowed or choked up.
It means you are the only one who has a chance of repairing the realms and Earth, and that Brix will lean on you pretty hard to try to control you.
She sounded almost apologetic, but I didn't care. I have zero idea how to do that. Do you have an instruction manual? Maybe a how-to guide? None of the magic I've learned has anything to do with dealing with too much magic. I know how to research, how to do specific spells. How in the world am I supposed to be the herald and solve all of this? My voice rose a bit at the end. My heart raced as I fought not to panic. I had just gotten free. I had the chance to be and do something for Caroline and me. It was so close. Turin just shrugged.
That is why you are the herald. It is something that only you will know how to do or figure out.
I put my head in my hands and fought to regain control of my emotions. When I thought I had some control and pulled myself back from the edge, I raised my head. Turin, thank you so much. I needed to know this. The twins are desperate to say hi. Do you mind before you go?
Of course not. Jasmine is my godchild, after all.
She lifted herself from the beanbag at the same time Joe and Sable stood.
I must say, you are taking this without the level of questions I expected.
I'm sure I'll have questions. I'm just going to process it later. I smiled at Joe and Sable. I'm headed to bed. I've reached my limit today. They both gave me a quick hug, and Turin patted me on the shoulder. I climbed the stairs, slipped into night clothes, and threw myself onto the bed. Moments later, Caroline crawled up on the bed, laying down next to me.
I'm sorry, my queen. I did not know.
I wrapped my arms around him and snuggled in, trying not to cry. How in the world was I going to save 4 realms when I couldn't even manage my own life? Chapter 5.
Cori Munroe was rumored to have been involved with the rip that occurred in Albany a few days ago. The question that remains on our minds is, did she cause it or close it? As the only double Merlin the Almo has admitted to, either is very possible. But over the years, she has proved more boring than most to watch. Is all her power a red herring, or is she a sign of the things to come?
Magical Daily News. My sleep was full of dreams I couldn't remember in the morning, but I did feel better. I pulled away from the roaring furnace that was Carolean and headed to the bathroom. A shower later, I was downstairs. It was early Tuesday morning, and I could have slept in, but too much was chewing in my mind. I had my coffee made and in my hands before Joe got downstairs. "Morning. You okay?" she asked, coming over to drop a kiss on top of my head. "Define okay," I replied, sipping my coffee. I'd made Sanchez's Mexican chocolate. The extra caffeine sounded good this morning as I tried to chase the last remnants of dreams from my mind. She said as she pulled out pre-made eggs and chicken burritos for the kids, throwing them in the air fryer. "I'll take that as a no. What are you going to do?" I snorted. If I knew that, I'd be the herald they'd want. First, I'm going to check on Heito. She cast me a curious look, and I thought back. I didn't tell you about that, or the rip and Steven, did I? Joe paused and gave me a look. If I'd been one of the twins, I might have been worried. As it was, I just smirked. Then my smile faded. Heito had a heart attack and is in the hospital. I'd like to check on him the normal way. I looked at my watch. I think they are 13 hours ahead of us. That should make it about 7 p.m. I'll call shortly. "You have the number of the hospital?" Joe asked, curious. I laughed and shook my head. I don't even know what hospital he's in, but he gave me his email and cell phone number. I'm going to hope that works. If not, I'll cheat. I smirked. A phoenix can go get the number for me, if he's still talking to me. I laughed and relayed what had happened with the council meeting. The story finished as 2 sleepy kids tumbled into the kitchen and climbed up on the stools at the kitchen counter. "Morning, my monsters," I said, hugging them both. "Enjoy school today, and remember, nothing lasts forever." I pulled up Jazz's chin to look at me. "You'll find your own friends." My smile as I nodded at Joe made her smile. "Yes, Mama Cori." I let them be and headed up the stairs. I settled down in my chair in the study and took a minute to just exist. It felt like more of a home than I had ever known, and I didn't want to give it up or put it at risk. The only way through was forward, so I picked up the phone and dialed the international number. It rang 5 times before it was picked up.
"Good evening, Madame Monroe. Or I suppose for you it is morning."
Heito's voice came clearly through the phone, and while he sounded exhausted, he still sounded like himself. We'd met occasionally through the years, and while we weren't quite friends, we had managed to become decent coworkers. It was the best example I could come up with. "Heito, Jorgaz brought back word of your condition. How are you doing?" I asked, watching the sky getting lighter out the window.
"What prompted him coming to check on me? The bird can barely stand me."
I snorted. Your absence at the council meeting disturbed them. Apparently no one has ever missed one before. I pointed out the frailty of humans and basically told them to deal. He chuckled softly.
"I am sure that put Brick's feathers in a major twist."
That it did. And even worse, I told them to deal with 2 counselors and left. He laughed, then broke off in a pained gasp.
I can see how they would have been less than amused."
"So, how are you?" I pressed, trying to figure out just how bad it was.
"I am alive. which is more than anyone expected about 36 hours ago.
His voice had a pensive tone, and I got the feeling this had really thrown him. What happened, if you feel like sharing?
Aortic rupture. I dropped walking down the street. A few mages that were nearby stabilized me until they could get me into the operating room. From what they said, it was very touch and go.
He coughed again, sounding a bit wet. You are lucky. Even with mages, often those just mean immediate death. The memory of Henry flashed through my mind. I will say the council as a whole isn't happy, but they can't really say anything. Though exchanging numbers with Shay or Amadahi might be wise. I couldn't resist the gentle poke.
Granted, that would have helped. Honestly, we usually talked for a few hours after the meeting, and I met up in a place Amadahi set up monthly. I'd get notified when it was created. Short-sighted of us. But they wouldn't have been notified prior to the meeting. I've only been awake for about 12 hours. You are on my list of people to call, but I've been dealing with doctors most of the day.
He paused, and I knew what was coming.
Cori Munroe, I'm going to need a step down. Even if I respond excellently to the treatment, it is going to take months of rehab and physical therapy to get me back to where I was. The doctors have told me I need to reduce my stress. Even though I stepped down as Majutsushi, I'm still advising and involved. Then the council. My body has said no more, regardless of what my spirit wants.
I figured as much when Jorgas came back. If something minor had been wrong, you would have been at the council meeting.
And if that isn't proof that I need to reassess my priorities, I don't know what is.
His dry humor matched my own. Yes, it does. So, do you have any thoughts about whom to recommend to replace you? He went quiet. My eyes narrowed, even though he couldn't see me. Don't you dare say me.
Who else could I choose?
Not me. This is your responsibility. Figure it out. They need someone with more global views, and that isn't me. I could feel my hands clenching and worked to release them.
As you wish. On that note, may I request the information for Amadahi and Shay?
Here, I'll send you Shay's. I matched action to words and shared my contact with him. I, however, don't know any way to contact Amadahi, or if she even has a phone. Wait, I have an idea. I hit mute on the phone and looked at Caroline, who had migrated to the window seat of the study at some point in the conversation. Can you contact Amadahi's familiar and ask for a contact number for her? He flicked an ear at me.
Kalichia is awfully arrogant, but for my queen, yes.
He closed his eyes. I unmuted the phone. I've asked Caroline. I'll let you know if I get an answer.
Thank you, Cori Munroe. I do understand this should have been dealt with previously, just...
He trailed off, and I couldn't help a sad laugh. Just, you thought you'd have more time, or it would never happen to you?
That might be accurate,
he said slowly. His voice was getting weaker, and I knew it was time to go. I understand. I'll let you know if I get her info, and then I'll check in later this week.
That is kind of you, Cori Munroe.
I sighed. Heito, call me Cori. It has been too many years. Just call me Cori. The title always kind of made my skin crawl, and now it was worse with what Turin had told me.
Very well. Until later, Cori.
We hung up, and I looked at Caroline. I can't decide if you really dislike birds or are just annoyed you can't chase them. Or worse, if you did, they might take their irritation out of your hide.
Does it have to be either or? I provided Kalichia your email address. He said he would pass it on when she woke.
The entire time he hadn't bothered to do more than move his tail.
Can we go hiking today? I long to feel fresh scents and be out in nature.
There was the slightest bit of a plaintive note in his voice, and I felt a stab of guilt that slashed through me. Absolutely. Let me get changed, get supplies ready, and we'll go. Any place in particular? I rose, putting action to my words. He lifted his head, looking at me.
Really?
I moved over and dropped a kiss on the top of his head. Yes, I've neglected you for far too long. It's time to make up for that. He flicked a tail at me and stepped off the bench.
I would like Yosemite. The sun should be rising shortly there. We can see it come up from the top of El Capitan.
That sounds wonderful, but only if you promise to set us back down at the bottom. I am not up to climbing that mountain. He loved visiting Yosemite. Plus, he found the freestyle climbers fascinating. I was not picking up that hobby. Ever.
Deal.
I turned to head out of the study when my phone rang. Good morning, Steven. What has you up so early?
It's almost 8. I've been here for an hour,
he said, his voice slightly snippy.
I need to talk to you.
I leaned against the desk, calculating time in my head. We had a little time. Go for it. He sighed.
There have been more portal rips appearing, and people are struggling to close them. There's a task force being formed, and I need you to be on it.
Doing what? I just got done with the draft. I don't need money. I was going to enjoy being unfettered for a while. I protested, as my life started to slip out of my grasp in yet another arena.
You'll hear all of that when we meet. I need you here in an hour,
he ordered. No. My word was quiet, but firm.
What?
I was annoyed enough that I didn't even enjoy his sputtering.
I need you here to talk to the team so we can come up with a plan on how to deal with these rips.
If I didn't know better, I would have thought I was 20 again, with him bellowing at me. Too bad for him, I'd met beans that made his anger look as threatening as banana pudding. He couldn't even roast me. Steven, I said, my voice icy. In case you forgot, I am out of my draft. I do not work for you, and I have other plans for today. If you would like to ask me to come discuss something with you next week, nicely, I might consider it. Until then, I'm busy. Goodbye. I hung up on him and turned to see Caroline sitting there, staring at me. What?
You really are going to turn him down to spend time with me?
Just the words felt like a sword shoved into my chest. I knelt next to him and wrapped my arms around him. Caroline, you are the other half of my soul. Joe is my best friend. Sable is my dearest friend and my best friend's soulmate. You are part of me in a way I didn't realize was possible. I will turn down the world for you. He laid his head against mine and purred, the rumble vibrating my bones, but I didn't let go. After too short of an eternity, he pulled back.
You need to get ready if we are going to see the sunrise and hike today.
I nodded, wiping unshed tears away from my eyes. 10 minutes. I changed, grabbed his harness, bowl, emergency water, and food. Let Joe and Sable know where we were going and that I was leaving my phone here. Then Caroline opened a rip to the waypoint, then another to the top of El Capitan. We sat down, my arm wrapped around him. Together, we watched the sun creep up over the mountains and grace the world with color as I held the one being I never wanted to live without. Chapter 6. Japan and China entered new talks today. After the dust-up that saw Empress Shishi take control, relations between the two countries have been warmer than they've been in decades. While there haven't been any drastic changes on the international stage in regards to China, there are many little signs that imply China might be changing policies that have been in force for over a century regarding other countries. CNN News. We stepped back to the house after a long day of hiking through parts of Yosemite few people ever got to see. Caroleon had chased animals, ate a few gophers, and basically worn himself out. I'd need to get him a universal hunting license again, something that predator familiars could get as long as they only took older or lamed game. The smell of pizza caught me off guard, and I headed into the kitchen, both of us sweaty and mentally refreshed if exhausted. 3 takeout pizza boxes sat on the counter, unusual for us. "Joe?" I called out. "In here," she said from the living room. When I stuck my head in, I saw Jazz sitting in a corner pouting, Maine sitting in another corner, and Joe slumped in the recliner looking exhausted. Good grief, what happened? I was only gone for, 10 hours? Caroleon sat next to me. While wearing his harness, flomping to the floor wasn't very comfortable. "You know your phone has been ringing nonstop? I finally shut it off. Then Alexan started calling me. I answered, and he wanted to know why you weren't picking up your phone. I told him you left it here and went hiking. His frustration was greatly amusing." Joe glared at me through heavy-lidded eyes. "Meh, he's forgetting he's a friend, not my boss, and that I don't report to him. He might also be under a bit of stress. I'll call him in a bit. But what is all of this about?" I waved my hand at the twins, who kept glancing back at us, but didn't move from their stools. "Miss Jazz here decided to cut off Laurel's hair because she made a derogatory comment about Jazz's curly hair. She called it a wiry bush mess and said that I should shave it all off," Jazz blurted out. I looked at her bushy afro and flinched internally. Jazz's hair was a mixture of Joe and Sable's hair, thick and curly, and when it got longer, it would fall into ringlets. Right now, it was a bit on the frizzy side, as she had decided to cut it herself, and we had to even it out a few weeks ago. Super curly hair tended to look a bit chaotic this short. Maine's hair was still in close braids. Someday I was sure he'd have long braids, but right now he needed to be convinced it wasn't okay to leave mud and twigs in it. Jazz just required time, oil, and nurturing. Joe heaved a sigh. "Being that as it may, you still shouldn't have cut off her hair." She shifted her attention back to me. "I got an emergency call from the school. I went 2 hours helping Laurel's hair to grow back using transform and pattern at twice the cost of what I replaced. It was that, or they were going to press charges." "Over hair?" "Yes." Sigh. Joe just slumped down a bit more. "I'm exhausted." I figured with the pizza. Why is Maine in the corner? He still hadn't spoken, a pout on his face. "He decided it was a good idea to laugh at Jazz's calling her stupid and said this is why she didn't have friends." "Oh," I said. Obviously, no dessert for either of them. They both have time out and, well, Jazz already has his chores to do, but he made fun of her. I'm not quite sure what to do." Joe sounded like she needed an hour in the tub. "I'd say, since he doesn't know how to be a nice person, we don't want to inflict him on Bobby. Hence, no playdate this weekend." "What? But that isn't fair!" Maine cried out, spinning to give me wide eyes and a pouty lip. "I don't know. If you can't be nice to your sister, I'm going to assume you don't know how to be a good friend. When you figure out how to be a better person, then maybe you can go back over to Bobby's," I said with no sympathy. Missing one weekend of getting to see Bobby wouldn't hurt him, and might make it sink into his horribly stubborn head. He sagged in his chair and stared at the wall. A timer went off, and Joe touched it. "Okay, you two, upstairs. Pick up your room and then outside to wear off your annoyance." They both got up and raced upstairs before either of the adults could stop them. I snickered. They are never going to survive childhood. Them? I'm not going to survive it. I owe my mother cases of chocolate and tequila. She rubbed her temples, flinching as her phone rang. Joe picked it up, sighed, and handed it to me. "You talk to him. I'm done." Low-level annoyance sparked along my nerves. I answered, "I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Then I hung up the phone. "Joe, go rest. Carol-Ann, after I get all your stuff off of you, will you go watch the kids?"
As long as I can do it half asleep. I am exhausted.
We both snorted. Half asleep, Akath was more aware than most humans, fully wired on coffee. 10 minutes later, I had his stuff all sorted. I'd taken a quick shower, changed into comfortable clothes, and was powering my phone back on. I had barely come back on before it was ringing. "Really? You couldn't wait?" I said, sitting down in my chair, putting my feet on the ottoman.
Where have you been?
He almost shouted into the phone. At that point, my patience and vague humor vaporized. "Please attempt to remember, Mr. Alexant, that I do not work for you. I am not your child, nor your wife. One more round of shouting at me and I will block your number and ignore all your attempts of contact." My voice registered in the Arctic range. Alexant had always been temperamental, but I would not ever put up with this. I heard his teeth snap shut. There was heavy breathing on the other end, and then a sigh.
I needed you today, Merlin Munroe.
"Too bad. I'm not in the draft."
I will pay you,
he gritted out. "Yes, you will, but that isn't the point. It is my first week out of the draft. Do I need to remind you what you did?" He'd told me one night when all of us got drunk, way before the twins. He'd run away to Australia for a month, dropping completely off the grid. He drank too much, surfed badly, and had too much fun with a lot of women. Another sigh.
It's bad, Cori.
"And you think yelling at me is going to make it any better?"
No. I never learned, do I?
Frustration seeped down the line, and I had to fight not to give in, even though this might be more my problem than I thought. You fall back on bad habits way too often. Indira has mellowed you, but you need to stop before you burn bridges you really can't afford to burn.
Noted. Are you willing to come to a meeting tomorrow? I'm creating a task force and I need your help.
The rest of what Turin had said snapped back to the forefront of my thoughts. What is happening?
The rips are becoming more common. There are reports of them from all over the world, and things are slipping in. Not a lot, but even one a year is unusual. We need to hunt them down, and preferably return them. Kill them if they're dangerous and close the Merlin-cursed rips.
I wrinkled my nose at that. I still couldn't really accept that I was the equivalent of a Merlin. Okay, and I still didn't understand why they needed me. There were lots of mages and Merlins. He had the ability to grab anyone in the draft.
You shut the rip by yourself,
he said with a flat tone that didn't make sense.
And? On average, it is taking 2 to 3 mages of Archmage Chaos rank to get them to close. You did it alone.
The frustration and anger had faded, leaving only exhaustion.
I had one mage lose half their easily available offering. At the rate they are opening, I'm going to run out of mages in a few months. And worse, no one has any idea why this is happening. Is it a new change in magic? Is magic going to go away? What?
I see. All my knowledge about why this was happening stayed firmly behind my lips.
So yes, I need you. Desperately.
He didn't plead. I wasn't sure he could. Is it going to explode in the next week? And I mean, literally, is the world going to end? I pushed him. He took a deep breath.
No, they are coming on every couple of days, but only every third one is really large. Those are the ones requiring archmages.
Excellent. I'm off this week. Set the meeting up for next Monday. Have all the numbers there for us, and pull in Charles. I'd like to work with someone I know and trust on the data side. I'm sure you can get him for a short-term contract.
Do you know how much he costs?
I heard the wince in his voice. Yes, because he is that good. Send me the info and I'll see you Monday. It's better for us to hit this with cool minds and not panic because it is relatively unheard of. But remember, I've seen smaller rips appear for years. I usually just close them. Mentally, I knew I had a lot more questions for Turin, but I was determined to enjoy pizza with Joe, Sable, and the children first. She'd gotten the good kind. Also, I have a few things personally I need to do, and I'd like to enjoy not working for a while before diving back in.
Okay. Thanks, Cori. I don't take obstacles well. I tend to bulldoze them over.
It was as close to an apology as I'd get from him. I know, but remember, you can't bulldoze me. Not anymore. My smugness might have filtered down the line. It wasn't completely true. As a Merlin, I could be recalled, but this wasn't a natural disaster or something devastating. At least, not yet.
It does seem that way. I'll get you the email by Friday.
With that, he hung up. I grabbed a notepad and made some notes. Writing things out always helped organize my mind. How could I stop or drain the magic? How long until it became a serious issue? Why had Esmere listened to anyone? In all honesty, the last one worried me the most. I set down my pen and headed downstairs. What can I help with? I asked Sable, who was walking out of their bedroom, dressed in her standard house clothes, a tank top with built-in bra and loose pants. These happened to be in bright yellow for the tank top and dark gray for the pants. She smiled at me. If you'll get the kids in and washed up, Joe has collapsed in the tub and I'm leaving her there. Excellent. Will do. I pivoted and headed out back. It didn't take more than 5 minutes to get them in and convince them they needed their hands and face washed for pizza. We sat down enjoying the treat. Caroline just wanted some kibble and water. He still acted like the energy had been drained out of him. Are we moving? Maine asked after he'd finished off 2 slices of pizza and was working on a third. I flinched. We will be, yes. Sable's voice was calm. Why? Do we get our own rooms? He responded, watching both of us. Yes, Sable said. Is that something you'd like? Oh, yes, please. Jazz all but gushed. Can mine be green? Slow down, both of you, Sable said. We are moving, but it will be weeks, if not months, until it happens. There's a lot to work out. I fought to keep my smile in place. Even though they would only be half a mile away, it seemed like a huge chasm at that moment. About that, Hamadia said, emerging out of the woodwork. I wanted to beg a favor. Apparently, me quitting the draft meant my life went back to being Murphy's toy. I checked all of us for Murphy's cloak, but we were clean. I braced for the next complication in my life. You never have to beg, I said with a smile. Hamadia had green-brown skin today, and lots of flowers on small branches, draping like hair from her head and down her back. I didn't think I'd ever seen her with so many flowers on her head. How can we help? Chapter 7. There have been multiple reports coming out of Europe of monsters slipping out of the rips. So far, there have been proof of at least one being killed, but the others still exist only as rumors. France and Spain have created a bounty for any monster that isn't a registered familiar. CNN Mage Focus. I waited with a slightly forced smile as Hamadia hovered on her toes. The children are moving into the big house down the road? She asked hesitantly. We are going to, though not like tomorrow or anything, Sable said, giving the kids a glare. We have lots of work to do to get it ready for us, not to mention cleaning and painting. The kids sagged a bit, but the idea was sparking in their minds even more. Ah, yes. That was related to what I wanted to ask. I'd never seen Hamadia this hesitant. Go ahead, You know us, we'll listen," I encouraged.
"It has come time for me to have a sister-daughter. After all these years, I have decided you are worthy of being a friend of dryads. I would like to plant my sister-daughter in your new house. That way, she will grow with your children. I would like to request this of you."
We all stared at her. I knew that James had basically trapped Hamadia here against her will, and when I got the house, there was no way to free her because she was literally part of the house. For her to offer this? Sable cleared her throat. "I don't know what to say, Hamadia. We would be honored. What would we need to do?" Hamadia looked at the floor, bouncing a bit.
"Normally, sister-daughters are in the same grove as their sister-parents. We create groves of our family, but that is impossible in this world, and Earth is richer in many things than the realms. But with her so far away, I would need a way to reach her."
She broke off, and the flowers running down her arms closed up tight.
"If you are amenable, I would create a round tunnel between I and she. I would always see and hear her, making sure she never had to grow alone."
The "like I did" was heard clearly between the words. "Of course." Sable rose and walked over to her. "We would never ask you to be away from your child. Are you sure we can fulfill her needs?"
"Oh, yes. This earth is rich, and I know you would set up a watering system like I have here."
The surety in her voice made me feel a bit better.
"I would create a tunnel. It would literally be a door between here and there."
My head jerked up at that. Wait, does that mean I could use the door to visit them? Like walking into another room? Hamadia tilted her head.
"I can make it like that."
"Please? It would make it like we were in one house, but still have our own spaces." It hadn't occurred to me that was possible, but even if it had, I would have never stolen a dryad, much less a child, to create it.
"Then yes, that is easily done. I cannot let her be on her own until she is mostly grown, or at least one should not."
The wave of emotion hit me, and I sagged in my chair, accepting the fact that they could go, but not go. I didn't know whether to cry in relief or scream with joy. I was fighting through the emotions so hard I almost missed the rest of it. "Obviously, we will do this. What do we need to do, and how long until she is mostly grown?" Sable's eyes were sparkling at the idea.
"Oh, 2 or 3 of your decades,"
Hamadia said.
"Willows grow fast."
Sable grinned. "I think we'll be fine. Once we start working on it, do you want to help so it can be the best place for all of us?"
"Oh!"
Her entire demeanor lit up. The flowers along her arms opened and her eyes brightened.
"Please, I can leave my tree for an hour or 2. I would love to make sure my sister-daughter has a home as nice as you have made mine."
Both Sable and I had tears in our eyes. I got up and wrapped my arms around Hamadia. "I am so glad you are part of our lives." That started everything. A minute later, there were 2 almost 6-year-olds wrapped around her and 2 mages that couldn't squeeze her tight enough. Hamadia's flowers burst open, filling the room with the sweetest floral scent I've ever smelled. Her arms wrapped back around us, and today we held that hug until the kids started to squirm. We pulled away, and Hamadia, who now had flowers across her cheekbones, beamed at us.
"We will talk later?"
"Yes," Sable said with a grin. A thought popped into my mind. "Hamadia, do you know anything about draining magic out of the realms?" She looked at me with the long twigs in her head twisting around.
"What do you mean?"
The odd wariness was back in her voice. "Didn't you listen to Turin?"
"Oh, yes. I had never heard of that before. The realms must be very full. It almost makes me glad I pour magic out here.
I leapt on that. How do you do that? How would I drain the realms? She blinked 3 times.
I am not sure. I pull magic from there and use it here. The closets, the rooms, the garage. There is always plenty to pull. How do you pull magic now?
She tilted her head, looking first at me, then the others. As far as I am aware, I don't, I said with a frown. I never thought about that. Where does magic come from? I had assumed it just was a part of me and what I could do, not that it might have ebbs and flows like water.
Then I don't know. Magic is used, but I don't know how humans would take magic from there and use it here. I will go start on my daughter. She will be ready to transplant in 3 months. Is that okay?
That is perfect, though it means we need to get going. A new home for all of us, and we get to keep the old home. How awesome is that? Sable was bouncing on her toes in excitement, looking eerily like Hamadia. Hamadia faded away, and Sable and I looked at each other. Squee! The shriek of excitement slipped out of both of our throats at the same time. We hugged each other tightly as the kids went back to their pizza. A slight stab of pain had me twisting my head, looking for it. A moment later, Esmere walked in. You seem elated. Are you pregnant again? No, not happening. Once was enough, thank you very much. The words were out of my mouth before I could consider how they might come across. To my relief, Sable just laughed. I think 2 are enough for us also. What brings you here, Esmere? Caroline hissed at her.
I am most upset with you. How dare you put my queen at risk?
I flinched. I had wondered if he was still mad at his Malkin. That answered that question. Esmere sat staring at him, her golden eyes unblinking. Do you really want to discuss this in public?
Yes, you hurt all of us. Why should it not be publicly revealed?
Ah, Sable said, raising a hand at the fascinated look on Maine's and Jazz's face. You 2 are just picking at your food. Clear your plates. Jazz, you have chores to do. Maine, go pick up your room. It is an hour until story time and bed. Go, she said with a shooing motion. Dragging their feet a little, the kids did as told, though I had no doubt they would try to listen in. Esmere and Caroline would not broadcast to them. Now, does Joe need to be part of this discussion? Sable asked. I'm here. I could feel the tension from the tub, Joe said, walking in with a robe wrapped around her. Besides, the pizza was calling to me. She grabbed 3 pieces, kissed Sable, and took a seat. What are we talking about?
That my Malkin could not be bothered to provide important information to my queen. Information she needed,
Caroline said, a sour tone to his words. Esmere hissed. It was a sight that made me flinch. Having a cat in your house the size of a Shetland pony was fine, as long as you ignored her claws and teeth. When she hissed, it was hard to ignore. I had no choice. I wanted to prepare her. I was not allowed. I told Bob I would not. Her tail lashed back and forth. He required it of me. Sable looked at the 2 annoyed Cath. I don't understand. I'm not saying that you should break your word, but what is the big deal? I agreed with Sable. A little warning would have been nice, but I didn't think it would actually change anything. Caroline was aggressively grooming his inside hind leg, exposing everything. I could never decide if he knew how rude and shocking that would be as a human or not. Cori, would you void your joining? Throw away your ring because you disagreed with Joe and Sable about what information to give the kids about sex? Esmere asked suddenly. What? No. The words were said almost reflexively.
That is the level of what I would be breaking as my lord required it of me.
Esmir's tail was lashing, and her tongue licked in and around sharp claws.
There was nothing that put your life in danger, so I acquiesced.
Ah, I said slowly. Is it part of your commitment?
You could say that. It is not a human thing. It is a magical agreement that I accepted when I became a lord, that Bob may demand certain actions from me. This was one of only 2 asked in over 100 years.
Her tail whacked Caroline on the thigh, and he glared at her, but dropped his leg. Okay, I said. Turin didn't break a promise by telling me, did she?
No. Brix tried to elicit a vow from her, but she declined. Brix won't be happy, but as nothing was broken, there isn't much he can do.
I nodded, a bit relieved. Now that I know, can you talk about it?
Yes,
she replied, settling down. What does all this mean? How in the world am I supposed to fix it? I tried to keep the panicked whine out of my voice, or maybe it was exasperation. Mostly, I think it was a mix of everything plus frustration.
I don't know.
Her words fell on me like punches to the heart.
But while the issue is increasing, it is not about to explode in the next month. This means you have time to figure it out, I think.
Her adding those last words didn't help. Where would I do that? Has this ever been done before? I mean, has anyone ever dealt with the realms having excess magic? Or rips forming like this?
Not in my memory, but I am not that old. Turin did not give you any clues?
Not really. Just that I was a magic user like Merlin, Solomon, and a few others. I looked at Joe and Sable, but they just nodded. A thought caused me to frown. Esmere, what was the undoing? Esmere, whose tail had stopped acting like a whip, canted her ears forward, amber eyes gleaming.
Why do you ask?
Turin said I was the first one since the undoing, other than Merlin. I didn't know what that was. Granted, most of the people she named I only know from the history books, if that. Sable got up and brought a pot of tea for all of us. Esmere, do you want something to drink or eat? All of us fully embraced the idea of if we had people over, we provided food and or drink.
Thank you, but no.
She took her Egyptian cat pose, eyes closed, head tilted.
It is mentioned occasionally, but only in that it is why magic left your world. I know little else about it, but I am not that old and am the first cat to ever be part of the council. Most of my kind find the rules and trappings of magic not worth the benefits.
I nodded. We talked about this before, so that made sense. Could it have anything to do with the magic surging now?
I do not know. You would have to ask ones older than I. They are mostly council members.
There was something apologetic about her tone that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Great. Then I can go and talk to them? Caroline chuffed at that and stretched out, looking impossibly long.
Could you just go walk up and talk to your president or governor?
He asked. No, of course not, I said, surprised.
Then do not think you can talk to them any easier.
His contempt for them came through clearly.
Caroline is right. Unless you are a counselor, they will not discuss this with you.
Esmere confirmed. It was a good thing I held a mug of tea in my hands, because the desire to be overdramatic was high. Really? This is what Brix wants me to do.
And Brix isn't as important as Brix beliefs.
Esmere snapped. I groaned and took another sip of tea. Maybe I should add some whiskey. Chapter 8.
Please double-check the numbers on the emerging mages. While the increase in archmages and merlins is interesting, the ages are concerning. Historically, the average age has been 23 to 25, with over 85% of all mages emerging in that window. However, the newest report is showing the age has skewed to 21 to 24. As the historical average has held for over 70 years, the change seems a bit drastic. Review and report.
OMO, internal memo. On that note, I headed to bed. The next morning, Caroline seemed less snappish, literally, and I assumed he and Esmere had made up. The morning chaos of kids, school, and work went through the house like a tornado, until by 8 a.m. I was mostly alone as I cleaned up the kitchen. When the normal chores were done, I headed back to the study, my to-do list firm in my mind. I would call Shay first, Bluetooth headset in. I clicked on his contact.
Who is calling me at this hour? Do you know some of us like to sleep?
Shay grumbled into the phone. Yes, I know. I'm one of them, but since everything seemed to get dropped in my lap, you get to wake up. I had zero sympathy, but I also had a large cup of Mexican coffee. It was guaranteed to get me through almost anything.
I can hang up,
he responded, but I could hear him moving in the background. You could, and then I'd ignore the counsel. Have you talked to Hisahito?
Yeah, he's due to move to rehab by the end of this week, but it is making it a bit difficult for him to find a replacement. Any thoughts?
Not my problem, I replied automatically, but I'm willing to help if you'll help me.
Sorry, my baby-making days are over. You'll have to find another donor.
The mental image threw me off my game, and I couldn't even come up with a response for a full 30 seconds. Shay, I can assure you that would never be an option. Also, remember, I have a familiar that would be more than delighted to visit you in the middle of the night and urinate all over you while you sleep. Caroline flicked ears forward at that, tail thumping with amusement, though it wasn't worth moving from the window seat.
Ooh, harsh. You play dirty, Munroe. I like that.
There was the sound of gurgling and hissing in the background, so I figured he was getting some coffee or something like that.
What can I do to you?
I rolled my eyes. I need to talk to some of the other counselors. Can you introduce me or get some information for me? He snorted.
Good luck with that. They talk just fine in council sessions. Argue, swear, make threats. It's great fun.
He fell silent as he drank his coffee. If I closed my eyes, I could even remember what I used to make for him back when I worked in the coffee shop in Rockaway. Double espresso with an almond milk chaser? I asked.
Triple. You got me up too early. I'm retired, remember?
Uh-huh. Can you finish what you were saying? He groaned.
Ugh. But after the council session, you'd think we were either servants or children. Seen, but not heard. I've never gotten them to talk to me. Amadahi got at least a nod from a few of them. It has been, 5 years since we started, and I know their races and species and not much else. The only ones even remotely social are Turin and Esmere.
His voice ended on an odd note. What? I can hear you thinking from here. I got up and moved to my desk, setting the coffee down as I opened up my laptop. By the time this was done, I figured I'd need to have taken notes.
This probably won't make sense, but they are too nice.
I sat up a bit straighter. You're right. Explain.
Did you have cliques in high school? You know, the jocks, losers, nerds, and so on.
Sure, though Joe and I were our own little group of two.
That surprises me not at all. But as I was saying, these two are the head cheerleader and the homecoming queen, who wander over and have lunch with the losers and nerds, and when anyone is snide about it, they just smile. I'm not sure if they are planning to stab us in the back or setting up for a coup.
Oh, I ran my fingers on the keyboard without clicking hard enough to type anything. I can ask?
They are playing a game, but look, do you trust them?
He sounded like he actually wanted to know. Yes, Turin is the godmother of Jazz and Esmere is the godmother of Maine. They are family. I said that without an ounce of doubt. But there is one thing you have to remember. I paused, thinking how to explain.
Oh? Though, knowing you trust them helps.
I do, without reservation. But I trust them to keep my children safe and alive, not to be socially acceptable. The denizens are not human, Shay, and you have to remember that. They are people, but they aren't human. Carolean to this day would eat anyone I killed and be pleased as all get out about it.
I still say you should have more bodies at your feet. The feasting would be great.
I ignored him and continued. You can't expect their motives or actions to relate to anything from human social mores.
Point. But yeah, I'll try to introduce you.
He left it at that. Have you talked to Amadahi? Does she have any ideas?
I haven't talked to her yet, but she did deign to give me a number to reach her at. I was going to see if she wanted to meet up this weekend.
Okay. Let me know if you need something. I'll check in on Heito on Friday, but then I'm going to be pretty busy, I think. So don't get worried if I'm not responding quickly.
Anything I need to worry about?
You've got the ability to close portals, yes? I asked, remembering he had some spirit.
Barely. I close them, but it isn't easy.
Balls, I whispered under my breath.
Why?
His voice was sharp, not the nonchalant attitude he'd had the entire call so far. Did you know the council is hiding stuff from you? Well, humans, to be precise. Not you specifically. I countered.
Did I know? Nope. Does it surprise me? Not even a little bit. But can you shine a bit of light on that statement?
Part of me wanted to be in the same room as Shay so I could watch his facial expressions and body language. Do you know about the magic Turin has been getting from humans? Shit, do the others? There was a long pause, and then,
What the fuck are you talking about, Munroe?
I groaned. Ugh, we need to meet, the three of us. Can you arrange that?
How am I supposed to do that? Do I look like a travel agency to you?
He snapped back. Figure it out. You're a Merlin. You have each other's contact information, but we need to meet this weekend. I took a deep breath. Let me ask a favor.
You'd better have an idea, 'cause I don't know how to get all of us here, and Sloane's place isn't that big.
He sounded grouchy, and I didn't care. This was ridiculous. I thought for sure someone would have mentioned it. Hold. I hit the mute button on my phone. Hamadia? Her head emerged out of the bookcases a minute later.
Yes.
Morning. I smiled at her. You doing okay?
I am busy seating. My sister-daughter is rooting well.
She seemed a brighter green than normal, so I took that as a good sign. Excellent. I can't wait to meet her. I have a favor to ask. Would you mind hosting a meeting for a few of us in your glade? We need to talk, and trying to travel to all the places is a bit difficult.
I do not mind. You always have the most interesting things happen around you. Let me know.
She faded as the last words were said, and I shook my head. Why is it that this strikes me as normal in my life? Still laughing a bit to myself, I unmuted the phone. I've got a realm glade for us to meet in. I'll ask Jorgas to bring Heito, Caroline can get you, and I'm assuming the Thunderbird can bring Amadahi. He cleared his throat.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll get a time set up and let you know.
I smirked. For once, I had Shay off balance. That was always nice. Sounds good. Thanks, Shay. I'll catch everyone up at the meeting. We hung up, and I stared at the walls, not really seeing them. Rips appearing, magic bursting through, counselors hiding things. And for some reason, I was in the middle of it.
Am I a driver now to go and get people?
Caroline asked archly, though he hadn't moved. No, you're my partner and the one I spend way too much on salmon for.
We should go deep-sea fishing, or go out on an Alaskan fishing ship.
I shuddered at the idea of an Alaskan fishing ship. I'd seen those documentaries. How about just a fishing trip to Alaska, and I'll get you a fishing license, and you can compete with the bears for salmon?
That sounds delightful. I insist.
I laughed and stood, looking at all the journals left from James, and that sparked an idea. Georgas, are you available? I pinged. There was still the glade with all his actual research and experiments, but the majority of them were referenced in these journals. I would probably spend another decade getting some of the information out there. The man hoarded information worse than Caroline craved fresh shrimp. A soft poof and a wave of heat grabbed my attention, and I saw Georgas hovering in the air. Before I could say anything, a tendril of vine emerged from the wall and transformed into a sturdy perch for him.
"Thank you, Amadahi. You are as kind as ever,"
he said, though I heard it too. He turned to look at me.
"Yes?"
There was an odd note of excitement that made me wonder, or maybe it was expectation. Denizens weren't much for the social pleasantries, so I didn't try. Are you willing to get Hisahito this weekend for a human meeting? Hamadia is hosting us in her glade. His head twisted and feathers lost some of their puff.
"I will do that. For you."
I laughed. Yes, I'm still making you the lemon honey berries. It has just been busy, but I also wanted to ask you about too much magic and something called the undoing. Georgas became very busy preening a feather, but I just waited.
"You know, then?"
Yes, Turin told me. Why is this being hidden from Earth's counselors?
"I do not know Brix's reasonings, but there are always multiple motives when it comes to Brix's actions."
That didn't tell me anything. What is going on? I sighed in exasperation. This is what helped create my relentlessness. I didn't have a choice. Georgas preened for another moment, a soft hum of laughter filling the air.
"I am unsure. I was never on the council and paid little attention to their machinations. But Brix has strong feelings for you, though I'm not sure why or what sort of feelings."
Huh? I think I've met Brix, 3 times? Maybe 4? Why would there be any feelings toward me at all? This really did throw me, even after what Turin had said.
"Just because we are both avians does not mean I know or like Brix."
Georgas chided. That is not what I meant. I defended myself, though, honestly, I had kind of thought that. But then most of the denizens I had met knew each other. I just don't know how widely talked about your politics are. For all I know, there is a realm paper sharing the juicy bits.
"True. That might make some of this easier, but most of us don't care. We live in our realms, some in our glades, as you call them, and we tend to ignore most of those in the other realms."
He still waited for something. Okay, I give. What do you want me to ask? Smug denizens were annoying. Living with one was more than enough. His excitement seemed to dim a bit.
"I had thought you were going to ask about the Phoenix Heart."
The look in his eyes was odd, but I shook my head. I'm not sure I know what that is.
"You didn't receive it with the rest of James' possessions, along with the manual?"
He sounded worried, and flames flickered around his tail. I opened my mouth to answer, but the phone started ringing before I could say anything. With a frown, not taking my eyes off Georgas, I answered. The ring told me it was Alexand. Yes, Steven?
"Cori, we need you right now,"
he said, his voice tight with tension and stress. Chapter 9. After nearly 25 years, the biker group known as BAM, Badass Mages, has officially disbanded. The founding member, Luther Sykes, provided this reason. We are all social outcasts for the most part, And functioning in polite society is more than we can do even with Scott Randolph riding herd on us. In the last year, 3 of our members have been sentenced to death because they let their emotions override their intelligence. Collectively, we decided that together the risk of us being stupid is higher than being alone. This was after his sentence of 5 years community service for an incident with his bike and a high-speed chase. Rumors do abound that once a year they still have a party far away from any hint of civilization. Magical Daily News.
What's wrong? We've had a spate of rips. I don't have the team put together yet to have response units. You are closer than most. Everyone knows you can teleport, even if they think it has the same huge cost as for most other mages. There's a huge rip in DC. It's letting things out. Can you get there and seal it?
He was almost begging. I was already up and moving. Yes, where? He fumbled for a minute.
I'll text you the address, but it's about a mile from the State Department. If you step to your old job, you should be able to get there with a few minutes run, or you might not need to be that close. It is growing.
Got it. I shot Georgas a look. We will talk about it later. Maybe after I meet with Shay, Hisahito, and Amadahi. Thank you again. You have been a good friend, but I have to go. He nodded, mollified. With a fluff of his feathers, he was gone. Come on, Caroline. I'm headed to where I would have gone for the State Department job. I ran into my room, changed into something I could run in, with shoes, texted the group chat with what was going on, grabbed Caroline's harness and kit, then stepped. As always, or at least since the twins were born, the offering was barely noticeable. I took a minute to orient myself. The text Steven had sent told me which direction to go. Caroline appeared at my side, and I took a minute to strap him in. Then we both set off at a jog. I didn't bother with the leash. If they could catch us, they could ask. Steven had been right that I would figure it out. I turned a corner into a park, and the gash in the middle of the trees was obvious. People were staring, but a few were running away. It wasn't the biggest I'd seen, but unlike the last one, it was only about 15 feet off the ground. Still moving at a brisk pace, we got there in time to see something with fur and 6 legs fall out of the tear in reality. It lay there stunned, then shook and stood up, opening a mouth full of sharp teeth. Crap. Caroline, go. He was already moving, but I felt his laughter in my mind.
Food or capture?
Your call. Just don't tell me what it tasted like. I responded as I kept moving so I could get into a clear area. The rip was only about 8 feet across, still bigger than what had been normal up until now. I grabbed my spirit magic and started to close it. Magic fought me. Something else started to wiggle out, and it was much bigger. I'd managed to get the rip down to about 3 feet, but the creature coming out didn't notice as it squeezed out, much like Caroline crawling under the bed. It was about 6 feet long, had scales, 4 legs, and a long tail. If I had to compare it to something, it looked like a really stretchy Komodo dragon, the earth type. Caroline, are you done? I've got something else coming through, and you'd better not get hurt. I took a second from fighting with the portal to throw a ring of fire around the lizard thing. It hissed and circled, looking for a way out. A young black woman ran up to me, spirit tattooed on the side of her head. How can I help? I didn't have time to stare to figure out her skills. What offensive skills do you have? Well, she stuttered. She sounded new, probably still in college. I'm strong and psychic, pale in soul, and relativity. Can you do electricity? It was one of the few spells in relativity that could act as an offensive attack. Yes! She almost shouted the answer, obviously glad to be able to say yes to my question. Had I ever been that young? Excellent. I'm focusing on sealing this tear. I want you to zap anything that sticks its nose out, or tentacle. Tentacle? Her voice quavered. Just if it moves, zap it. I answered, and I went back to my work. It was like zipping up pants that were just too tight. Everything was there to seal it, but it didn't want to give.
Coming. That was delicious.
I groaned. Ugh, I have a lizardy thing that isn't going to pay attention to the fire much longer. Can you trick it back or something? I heard in my head.
There seems to be order creatures. They are not sentient, as you call it. I can try, but killing it would be much easier.
I gritted my teeth as I pulled the tear closed. Another 2 feet to go. Things were still sticking noses, legs, and tentacles out. It reminded me of the internet videos of animals testing something new, wanting to see what it was and if they fit. I had to get the tear closed. I spent offerings constantly, not that it was all that much in the scheme of things. Rips had never fought me, not wanting to open, and the pants analogy was what stuck in my brain. Was magic forcing it to open or holding it? I pushed harder, and with a snap, the last bit slammed closed. I almost fell over with the release of it closing. Taking a deep breath, I turned to look at the girl. She was about 25, and there were chunks missing from her hair. What had, I assumed, been a nice, even afro puff hairstyle now resembled a golf ball with divots taken out of it where she had grabbed offerings. You haven't had cosmetic offering as a course yet, have you? I asked the girl. She had sweat dripping down her face, a bit of a wild look. No, that's next semester. Is it done? Are the monsters not coming? You stopped them. Good job, I said, trying not to laugh. This no longer even rated as a major event in my life, but for hers, it was probably the most exciting thing she'd ever done. Uh-huh. Now what? She still had a panicked aura about her. I looked around. People had stopped screaming, but everyone looked on edge. Caroline had the lizard thing thrashing under his paw, so while it was contained, it wasn't dead. Can you tell if anything else got out? I called out, though honestly he probably could have heard me even if I didn't.
At least 2 more of the tasty furred things, and one other thing I don't recognize, but it smells delicious.
The creature under him thrashed a bit more. How are you holding that? And what is it?
Lizard fast thing,
he offered.
If it has a name, I never knew it, and my claws are at the base of its spine. If it thrashes too much, my claws will sever it. It knows this.
Does that mean it's sentient? I had walked closer to them, though I didn't get close by any means. It really did look like the longer relative of a Komodo with better scales.
Rudimentary. It knows I will kill it.
Who are you talking to? The young woman said. She had trailed me. Just my familiar, I replied, waving at Caroline. Movement from the side caught my eye. And here come the authorities. A man, older and obviously out of shape from the huffing and red face he had as he rushed toward us, badge out and suit proclaiming government.
Agent Stims, you Cori Munroe?
He huffed, eyes glancing at me, then the girl, then locking on Caroline. Yes. Did Director Alexant send you?
Yes. He says thank you, and see you Monday.
His eyes didn't leave the thrashing lizard.
You are taking that thing with you, right?
I snorted. Yeah, I'll deal with it, but tell the director I'm charging him.
Yes, ma'am. And, who is this?
He nodded at the girl. Someone who actually helped. Get her info and turn her in for a reward or something. At the very least, see if you can get her time with a cosmetic expert on evening her hair. I looked at the girl, who seemed somewhere between hyperventilating and running away. You did good, and thank you. I waved to both of them and firmly extracted myself from the situation by walking over to Caroline. What do we do with it? The creature hissed at me, tail thrashing, but I noted it didn't try to pull away from Caroline's claws.
I can open a portal to order, but convincing it to go in will be difficult.
I'll create a shoot of earth to funnel him through and a spark of lightning to encourage him.
That would work.
A spark of pain and a portal sheared open. I created the wall around both of them, though not so high Caroline couldn't easily jump out. Go for it, I said, watching carefully. I'd made it a rectangle, so the portal was surrounded by my wall, leaving the creature nowhere else to go, I hoped. In a blindingly fast move, Caroline retracted his claws, sprang up, and landed to balance on the wall. The creature was almost as fast, whirling and hissing. It looked like it was going to try to climb the wall to chase after Caroline. I don't think so, I murmured, and slammed a jolt of electricity at its nose. That caused it to yank back and hiss more, showing very sharp teeth. Go, I ordered, and zapped it again. It twisted and writhed in ways that told me it was structured more like a snake than a lizard. But finally, after much hissing and multiple electric zaps, it went through the portal, and I sealed it, almost before the tail had slipped through. That was much more work than I expected, I said. I went to work, putting the earth back where it belonged.
Earth is fun. Many more creatures to hunt that won't fight back. Besides, humans are easy prey.
He tilted his head.
There are still more tasty things that escaped. Should we hunt them? I could do with extra food. Fear makes the flesh taste sweeter.
I rolled my eyes and turned, only to discover we'd gained a crowd. The amount of wonder and hero worship on those faces, including Agent Stims, made my skin crawl. I don't think so. At least not now. Maybe we can come back later? I smiled at the crowd and gave them a shaky wave, more uncomfortable than I'd been when trying to close the rift. I turned and headed away at a jog. Caroline ran by my side, laughing in my mind.
You don't like all your worshippers.
Shush, you. You may enjoy being worshipped. I don't. I headed toward the state building, ignoring anyone who might have called. When we got far enough away, I slowed down and looked around. We had a few people staring at us, or Caroline, but nothing else. I found a nice area out of the way and called Steven.
You okay?
Were the first words out of his mouth. Better than normal. Oh yeah, I'm fine. The rip is closed, but I know at least 3 things. Think rabbits, about the size of a medium dog, with way too many fangs, slipped out. Caroline said he's willing to hunt them, but not until the crowd disappears. You probably want to put out a wild animal alert. I kept my voice low as I watched people pass by, their eyes lingering on my familiar.
Will they attack people?
I looked at Caroline. Would they? He licked residue off his paws.
I would not know. They don't have humans to hunt in their realms.
I would say yes, especially kids. I was guessing, but worst case I was wrong and no one was attacked. Better than the alternative.
I'll get a warning out. Anything else?
I shrugged. Agent Stims should give you the rundown. I'd be surprised if there aren't videos of it already on the web. There's a young mage, Spirit, who showed up and helped. I'd at least talk to her. Most people run the other way. She ran toward me.
Name?
I could hear keys clacking as he typed. No clue. Your agent should have her info. Just saying. Okay, we'll come back tonight, and yes, I'll be there Monday. I have news. I let it trail off both to pique his interest and drive him crazy. I'll tell you then. See ya. I hung up, smirking a bit. Ready to go home? You want me to come with you tonight to hunt? I turned the corner as I talked.
Very. Though I must admit the idea of hunting this eve sounds delightful.
He murmured in my head as I sidestepped.
But in answer to your question, no, I do not need a babysitter to hunt.
I swallowed down a laugh. No worries. I never feel like I am your babysitter. Your archivist, maybe? Yelling, "Oh shit!" all the time. He laughed as we walked into the house, checking the time as I did so. It was a bit after 1 in the afternoon, and I sagged in relief. I need food and a shower. You?
I am full, and showers are only when I get doused with smelly stuff. I shall nap in the sunroom thinking of the hunt tonight.
That does not surprise me. I headed to my room. A nice shower and comfy clothes sounded wonderful.
Cori?
Hamadia's voice grabbed my attention as I stepped into the landing. Yes. I pivoted slowly, but didn't see her.
I thought you would wish to know. The eggs are starting to hatch.
Chapter 10.
Wild creatures verified roaming in D.C. All people should stay inside as the authorities round them up. They are believed dangerous. Pets and young children should not be outside at all. These creatures are faster than you. Stay inside until the authorities provide an all clear.
Warning on radio and TV in the D.C. area. What? I swerved to the left instead of heading to my room and stepped into the kids' room. What had originally been the green room had been set up with 2 beds and some ingenious design work by Joe and Hamadia to give them both their own private spaces, yet still share a room. It would probably be good for them to get their own rooms. I headed to the corner near their bathroom. There, tucked into the corner, was a shell-shaped basin filled with sand and 2 large eggs. In the years that we'd watched over them, they hadn't gotten much larger, but the colors had become more vibrant. Where originally they had both been a deep metallic brown, fading to gold, now one was a bright bronze with gold tracings through it. The other had faded to a rose gold with silver-blue crackles across the shell, making it shimmer in the light. The last few years they had laid there, unmoving, to the point I worried they had died. But Esmere and Turin had assured me they were fine. It just took longer on Earth, as the amount of stray magic wasn't as great. But now they were rocking back and forth, with cracks starting to run through the shells. They can't hatch yet. They need to wait for Jazz and Maine to be here, I said, suddenly panicked. The kids would be devastated if they weren't there.
So tell them to wait,
Hamadia said, as she stepped out of the wall to my left. Huh? I really needed to work on my responses. After a decade, I still sounded like an idiot half the time.
You are the Herald. Magic will listen to you. Tell them to wait.
It sounded insane, but I had nothing to lose. I placed one hand on each egg. Wait, don't hatch yet. A few hours are all we need. Please? I willed them to hear me, to delay. To my shock, the rocking slowed, and the eggs just hummed with magical energy. I looked at Hamadia, my eyes wide. What in the world? She held out her hands, small green leaves starting to edge into yellow and red at the edges, covering them like gloves.
You are the Herald. It is a small thing you ask.
They aren't even hatched. How would they know? Part of me was freaking out. Was there a huge sign on my head that other magical beings could see? Hamadia spun slowly, flowers tracing down the twigs of her hair.
Your magic has a flavor of power, or magic. It is like feeling the sun on your skin. You know it versus any other light. The sun warms you in a way you can't articulate, but you know it.
I blinked at her. The analogy actually worked, but it still made me feel like I was a little glowing ball of magic. Do I leak magic?
No, it is simply part of you.
She looked at the eggs.
I look forward to their appearance.
Then she stepped back into the wall. It took me a minute, but I chilled out and texted Joe. Eggs hatching. Get kids home right after school. Crap, will we be there in time? I stared at the eggs and shook my head in bewilderment. Yes, I'll see you then. My list of next steps spooled out in my head. Change clothes, get a dinner going, and welcome 2 new beings into my crazy family. Family. The word resonated in my head and I smiled. I had an idea. It would still be 2 hours, best case, before they got home. After my clothes were changed and a casserole was in the oven to start cooking, I called Marisol. "Hello, Mia." Her voice came through the line. I sank down into one of the chairs in the sunroom. "Hello, Mommy. How are you doing?"
The house is so empty. I keep expecting to hear the garage door slam, but it never does."
Her voice had a distant, empty quality that terrified me. "What do you have going on this week?"
"Not much. Sanchez will stop by, and I think I'm supposed to see Paulo's kids."
"Sounds like it will be fun." Paulo had moved down to Jacksonville for a while, a district manager. It meant she didn't see them often. Sanchez and Marco still lived in town, but they were busy with their own lives, and my heart broke a bit.
"It will. I haven't seen them for a while."
Her voice still sounded too lifeless.
"When do I get to see the twins?"
"That is what I was calling about. The eggs are hatching. Would you like to be here for it?"
"Oh."
Excitement peaked in her voice.
"They are. I would like to see them hatch. I've been so curious for ages."
"Good. Do you want me or Caroline to come get you?"
"Oh, Caroline, please. Your travel method still leaves much to be desired."
The familiar humor bubbled under her words, and it did my heart good. "Get dressed, and I'll have him head for you when the kids get here. You will be staying for dinner." That much wasn't a request, but a command given lovingly. We hung up, and I called out, "Did you hear that?"
Yes, I will go when it is time. You are planning something? What?
I shook my head, even though he wasn't in the room. "We'll see. It might not work out." Dinner was easily buffed up by adding tortillas, cheese, and salsa. The casserole would taste delicious, wrapped in tortillas with the added ingredients. I was about to go upstairs to my study, as the kids wouldn't be home for another hour, and Caroline wouldn't get her until they were here, which gave me some time to research what Georgas had been talking about. I grabbed the box and pushed my computer back to make space for me to explore the box. I opened the lid and took a look at what lay in there. The jewelry boxes I set aside. I knew what was in there, but I didn't know what Georgas had been talking about. There were various other little things, but I headed straight for the notebook. It wasn't a large journal like the rest of his stuff, but instead small, as if you'd keep it in your pocket. The first page had my attention. A phoenix heart is a way to focus magic to amplify the effects. But every time I've tried it, the effects have always had a negative effect. Example, use it to focus earth for grow. It works, but the plant grows so fast and hard that it saps the soil of all nutrients and dies of age in the space of seconds. Georgas mentioned something about a true and selfless heart, which I do not have. But what I fear is that if anyone got this, they could use it to great harm. As such, these are the only notes I will leave about. In the back is every experiment I tried and the results. I do not see how this could be used for anything positive. I paused and flipped through the book, and the results were rather horrifying. Every time it went to the extremes of what you could have asked for, though the cost was almost negligible. The notes called me back, though there was only a page more. Georgas knows this and believes it should be destroyed, but I can't help but feel there is some purpose in me finding it. I will continue to talk to him about how to use this, or what to do with it. Otherwise, if this falls into the hands of an idiot, may Merlin shrivel your brain. A laugh burst out at that comment. That curse was one I hadn't heard before. There, on the next page, was a drawing of the trilliant-cut gem. I dug through the box and really looked at it this time. It glowed a dusky pink color, with gold reflecting from the facets. The more I looked at it, the more it did remind me of the flames that appeared and disappeared with Phoenix transformation. My eyes were entranced by the play of light along the facets, and the more I looked, the more colors I could see in it. With it were all the colors of fire, from white to purple black. It might have been the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I would look at it for a while, read some of the experiments, then go back to it. I'd have to get more information from Georgaz as to what exactly it was, but it was irresistibly gorgeous. The slamming of a car door shook me out of the trance, and I blinked, my eyes dry. I looked at my watch. I'd been sitting there for almost 2 hours. Another shake of my head. I put the notebook and Jewel away. Then I headed down to 2 bouncing kids and an excited Joe. Sable said she'd be home in about 20 minutes. I nodded, returning hugs from the kids. Are they hatching? Can we see? Go change. Marisol's coming over to watch and to have dinner with us. Yay, Gamma! They cheered and raced up the stairs, making the house shake. It's really happening. Joe sounded wistful, and I hugged her. Yep, you always knew they would be powerful mages. This is part of that. At least they are old enough to take care of them, hopefully, and this should stop the dog requests. Oh, that would be nice. I swear, no more stories with dogs in them. Joe put her head on my shoulder, groaning. Oh, how did they grow up so fast? I swear it was last week when they were still learning to walk. We can throw them in a time bubble, I offered with a teasing smile. Gah, no. Wait, if we did it long enough? No, only works if you are the one casting the spell. Dang it. For a second, I thought I found a way to avoid their teenage years. She had a mock pouting face on. I laughed. Please, you can't wait. The question is, who is going to gain your mechanical abilities? She glanced up the stairs, but they were still up there. Her voice dropped to a secret, sharing whisper. I was thinking, since we own the street, I might build a bicycle with them. Let them customize each part, then see who really enjoys it as opposed to tolerate. And when were you thinking about doing this? Their birthday. They'll be 6. That's a great time to learn to ride. I smiled and grinned. Do we get to lay bets on how many sparklies Jazz puts on hers? No, because it will be double the worst-case scenario. She headed to change, and I walked to the sunroom. It was quiet there, and someday it would be quiet throughout the whole house. Would that be a good or bad thing? Who knew? Caroline, I said, stooping down to ruffle his head. You want to go grab Marisol? I'll take the casserole out, then dragons, and then dinner.
You really think you can foretell their hatching that exactly?
His voice was bemused as he stretched out, claws digging into the rug. Hamadia thinks I can. She says that the magic that marked me is obvious. He pulled back and looked at me. First with one eye, then the other, then with both pupils dilated wide, so his eyes looked like wells of chaos, dragging me in. They were back to normal slits.
I just see my queen, the powerful one I chose.
I laughed and rubbed his ears. You are zero help. Go get Marisol, please.
For you.
His tail stroked across my leg before he stepped into a rip and disappeared. They aren't hatching! The yell came down the stairs, and I sighed. I made sure to pull the casserole out and set the table while I waited for Marisol. The sound of the front door opening signaled Sable being home. You ready for drama? I asked as I stepped into the foyer. Why not? Has to be more interesting than fighting with engineers all day. At least the kids are smarter. Her frustrated tone brought a smile to my face. I get that. The slight spike of pain had me turning around, and soon enough, Marisol and Caroline walked down the hall. Her hair had more gray in it, and there were more lines on her face. She'd lost weight the last few years, grieving. It just hurt to see her eroding without Henry. It solidified an idea in my mind. 2, actually. I went over and wrapped her in a tight hug, not happy at the bones that met my arms. Sable followed up with her own hug. "I'm so glad you came over," she said, ushering Marisol up the stairs. "We've missed you."
You're busy with your lives. I get that. I probably should sell my house, but I don't want to live in the city where Marco does. But Balo and his kids are so busy, I only see them about once a week.
Her voice didn't sound depressed. It was just life. But her sadness resonated in her words.
"Come on,"
Maine said from the top of the stairs.
"They're rocking."
We stepped up our pace and gathered around the small basin, with the twins peering at the 2 eggs intently. Then, the rose gold one cracked. Chapter 11.
These monsters that are being registered as familiars are a risk to our families and the safety of our real pets. The idea that they are tame or able to be controlled is fantasy. There is a reason why most states outlaw keeping big cats as pets. These are monsters. They aren't even proper earth animals. They should be sent back to where they came from. Anything less is setting a precedent for them to be declared endangered species and start chunking out land for sanctuaries.
Freedom from magic. It felt like we all held our breath as the egg rocked back and forth, the crack getting larger. The other egg, the one that looked bronze, had started to rock too, but there weren't any cracks. A bit of gold shell flew off as a nose pushed through.
"Look!"
Jazz squealed as an icy blue nose poked out, wiggling to break the shell apart. I'd never seen anything so mesmerizing as watching this little creature press and push apart the shell. Joe put a hand on Jazz to prevent her from helping. "Let it be. It needs to push the shell away by itself." Jazz all but wiggled in place, her hair bouncing like a cloud of curls.
"Mine is hatching too,"
Maine whispered, and my eyes went to the bronze one. Sure enough, the shell had started to crack, and a nose was bumping out.
"Look,"
Jazz whispered in a hushed voice as the foot-long dragon moved over to her. The dragon raised itself up on its tail and stared at her. Their eyes locked. It was about 10 inches long, with 4 arms and wings. The scales on the little Quetzalcoatl dragon, though I called them Quetzos, started at pale icy blue and darkened as it went to the tail into a dark blue that was almost black. The tail was covered in tiny feathers in all the colors of the scales. The 2 feathered wings went from light blue to indigo. Rose gold eyes looked out of the pale face that was half snake and half smog. A longer snout than a snake, but not so defined as Smog's. A quick flick of the tongue revealed it to be forked.
"She's mine?"
Jazz asked, wonder in her eyes. "Maybe. We don't know if they are pets or people." "Caroline?" Joe asked, her voice a bit wary. Just because Turin said they were for the kids, they were still an unknown creature.
"They are bonding. Magic will let them talk. It is a baby. Don't expect much until they get older."
He tried to sound bored, but he was staring down at them, too, with rapt attention, ears out flat. "You try to chase either of them until they are older, I will shave you," I mentally hissed at him.
"I would never."
He denied, but his ears flicked up and his body relaxed.
"Mine!"
The phrase echoed in my mind, and Jays gasped, her eyes going wide.
"Was that the dragon?"
"Yes, a very loud dragon. Teaching it how to talk to you and not everyone is very high on my agenda."
Caroline's voice was sharp, and the Quetzal curled up a bit as if it knew the words were directed toward it.
"Caroline, don't be mean to my dragon,"
Jazz said with a pout as she reached out and scooped the dragon up.
"What's its name?"
"That is between you and the Quetzal, but I believe it is a her."
Caroline flicked his ears toward the other egg.
But you might want to see this.
I whipped my attention over to the bronze egg, noting that Maine's eyes hadn't moved, still staring at it with laser focus. A similar creature wiggled out, but instead of feathers, it had leathery wings with tiny scales that reflected the light. His head was the bright green of Esmir's fur, and it darkened to almost black at the tail. He had a ruff like a walking lizard that flared up and down as dark bronze eyes scanned us. Where the Quetzal and Jazz's arms had almost human-like hands, this one had more like claws, but the arms were longer, almost a third of its 10 inches instead of a quarter. It wobbled as it finished shaking the eggshell off and latched onto Maine. "Mine!" The word reverberated, and Caroline hissed.
Yes, speaking training. This is way too loud.
I would have chastised him, but he was right. It hurt like crazy, but that didn't slow Maine down, and in a second, the green Quetzal was curled around him like clinging to a life raft. "I've never seen anything so amazing," Marisol whispered. She wrapped an arm around my waist as she peered. "Thank you so much for this." I simply kissed her cheek and plotted.
Hungry! Food!
I had no idea which one said that, but the emphatic demand was unmistakable. My head rang with the force of their cries. "Caroline, any changes in what we had thought they would eat?"
No. Small pieces of raw fish, poultry, insects, or eggs.
He dropped down and moved toward the door.
I'm going hunting. Don't wait up.
"Don't get caught," I replied as he stepped away. "Come on, the food for them is downstairs," Joe ordered. 20 minutes later, after the fun, if disgusting, process of letting the Quetzals gorge themselves, they each lay in their chosen twins' lap with distended bellies. The rest of us focused on eating, or the adults ate and tried to convince the kids to eat and not stare at their new familiars every moment.
They are young. They will sleep. In a few months, they might become interesting.
Caroline stepped back into the house with those words. "How was the hunt?" I asked, making myself another casserole burrito.
Successful. They are excellent food. I may have to find where they come from and go hunt there.
He threw himself down and began cleaning his claws. "Hunt? Is there something we should know?" Joe asked, looking between Caroline and me. "Ah, right." I proceeded to tell them about the rip this morning in D.C. and the creatures that escaped. I didn't mention Georgas, but I still wasn't sure what all that meant. I figured he had another dire warning that probably wasn't needed, but then denizens thought in patterns. That made no sense to me. Conversation drifted back to the house and moving. Marisol looked so much more alive with the kids and her daughter talking to her, and it just made my idea seem more right. "This has been wonderful. Your little dragons are beautiful," Marisol said, smiling at the kids, who at this point looked as exhausted as the Quetzals. "Have you decided what you want to name them? Or do they have their own names?" Jazz stroked the back of her familiar, which had curled up in a ball. "Azul." The smile that lit up Marisol's face made me ache. I didn't think I'd seen it since Henry died. "Blue. I like that. And you, Maine?"
Vere. It feels right.
The Quetzal in question preened a bit.
Like!
The word burst across my mind, and I flinched.
They must learn to not yell.
Caroline groused. "You'd better teach them then, because I still yell sometimes if I push too hard," I said with a smirk. "Welcome to Parenting 101. He flicked his tail at me, then went back to grooming, obviously more important than us. "This was so much fun, but I suppose I should go home." I watched the light leave her eyes, and I shuddered at the thought of an empty house with only ghosts of memories there. About that, I had an idea. Well, a couple of them, actually, I said slowly, all too aware of everyone now looking at me, even Caroline. An idea? About what? Jo leaned forward, eyes locked on me, and I knew she'd seen the sadness wash over Marisol. We have the craftsman that we don't know what to do with. It is only a single bedroom and a study, with that garden in the back. I focused on her, trying to project the right emotions. It would put you near us, but still give you your own space. It would be easy for us to get you back to see Marco or Paulo or Sanchez. Then you could either sell the house or let Paulo or Sanchez have it. Let one of them turn your house into their home. You would be near the twins, Caroline, Esmir, even Tursane. She drops in more than you think. We could help you remodel it to look like anything you wanted. She blinked in surprise, even as everyone else's faces had huge smiles on them. Oh, Mommy, please. I've missed you. The kids would love to have you close, as would I. You're really their only grandmother. Jo leaned forward, her face glowing. Sable nodded. Really, we would love it. A thoughtful smile crossed her face. I wouldn't mind doing something new, being someplace new. Every place I go at home, I expect to see him. The shop, the store, the streets. Being someplace without his ghost in every item might be nice. I could see she was hesitating, but I had one more idea. There was one more thing. Hamadia?
Yes?
She floated up from the floor, the flowers in her hair so thick you couldn't see the twigs. In the last few years, she was happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. Now, if I didn't ruin it. I'd read what James did and would gladly go back in time to beat him half to death, but he had talked about the fact that dryads had saplings they raised from seeds, and usually they had 3 to 4 at any time, because they never knew when they might be chopped down or find the perfect place for a sister-daughter, and a sapling was ready to be planted, while if you planted a seed, she would grow up alone with no idea of anything. Large dryad families really only occurred in groves where you had the time to let them grow with protection. I was wondering, would you like to have twin sister-daughters and put another child in the craftsman and have Marisol help take care of her? I didn't have any issue volunteering Marisol. 1, because she had a much better record with plants than any of us, and 2, it would give her something fascinating to do. And if she was busy doing that, she wouldn't be grieving over Henry. Hamadia tilted her head so far to the right, I winced.
You would help me have 2 sister-daughters? Give them safe homes that will be protected?
I smiled. They will be more protected than you know. All these houses are on the historical register. They can't be torn down, and I promise I will leave them to my children and their children. I can't imagine they would ever allow anything to happen to your children. Jazz and Maine exchanged confused glances.
We don't hurt people,
Jazz said.
Well, I try not to.
Most of the adults laughed, but I saw shiny eyes around the table. Are you interested?
I would get a grove? A grove.
She sounded like I had given her the best gift ever, and I just nodded. She spun and stared at Marisol.
You would do this? Help my sister-daughters? Keep them healthy?
Marisol took a deep breath, and I think we all held ours as we waited. I hadn't meant to push her into the corner, but I also didn't want her to have time to convince herself otherwise.
See, I'll help with your sister-daughters. I'll move here.
The joy that exploded around the table had a physical presence as hugs were exchanged. Caroline didn't manage to escape it, though he didn't try too hard, and got plenty of hugs himself. We stayed up way too late making plans, but I saw parts of Marisol starting to heal, and that made it all worth it. We would have everyone here. Well, almost everyone, but Chris would come back when he could, and until he said otherwise, the garage apartment would be his. Chapter 12. The Queen has stepped down. Britain's monarchy is in a mess. Per British law, the monarch must be a Merlin, but the last drama with the prince has implied he is not fit to rule. There is no other Merlin available. Parliament has declared an emergency meeting to review the laws of succession to see what options there are. They may have to search outside the immediate family. CNN Mage Focus. We all headed to bed with smiles on our faces, but I awoke to remembering that I had a meeting today with the other counselors. Shay had messaged me late last night that we needed to meet late today, as there was another meeting on Saturday. Hamadia worked on the glade while I came up with food and made Jorgaz his berries. My phone rang around 1 in the afternoon, and I took a deep breath when I saw it was Sanchez. This meant Marisol had broken the news to them. I was worried that her sons would resist and try to guilt her to stay. "Morning, Sanchez."
"I can't thank you enough for this, Cori,"
were the first words out of his mouth.
"This is the best thing you could have done."
I sagged in relief. Honestly, I was a bit worried you guys would be mad.
"Not at all. Running the garage with Marco isn't 9 to 5, and then we are exhausted. I never realized how much work Bobby did. We don't have time. Honestly, with the 3 of you, she will feel needed, and we all know, Cori, that you will never keep her away from us. You are the best thing to happen to our family. What can we do to help?"
My smile hurt my face. It was so wide. "Help her pack. We can get a moving van, but I suspect you'll need a huge garage sale. A lot of stuff she won't want to keep or won't fit here. She has more than enough to buy everything new if she wants. Is she going to sell?"
"No, Paolo is going to move in and pay her rent for a year, then apply to buy it. It is much bigger than where he and his family are living now, so it totally works out."
We continued to chat until we both needed to go. Time flew by, and before I knew it, Caroline was stepping away to grab Shay, while Jorgaz agreed to get Hisahito, as long as he could stay. He kept giving me funny looks, but I didn't follow up on it. I really wanted to get this meeting done first before worrying about anything else. "You're sure Amadahi will be here?" I checked with Caroline as he got ready to grab Shay.
"I provided the information to her bird. The rest is on them,"
was his response as he leapt through the rip. The glade was ready as it would get, and I curled up in a chair of grass. After experience it during labor, I decided Hamadia's chairs were just as, if not more, comfortable than any fancy chair. The flash of pain as Caroline stepped through had me looking up and smiling as Shay entered. The dichotomy of how I remembered him and now threw me off for a minute. I still remembered the man in his late 30s with shocking red hair, Japanese features, and a wiry body. Now his hair was blending to white, and the braids no longer had fanciful items in them. They were just braids. He still wore jeans, but the science joke t-shirts were gone. When did he get old? "Hey, Shay. Coffee, pizza rolls, and fruit." I waved at the table.
"I guess if we need to meet, having food is a good thing."
He collapsed into the chair and reached for the coffee. "Are you okay?" He shrugged.
"This getting old stuff isn't for the old."
He sighed and put way too much sugar in his coffee, but I just let him. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but dual spikes of pain that had my eyes crossing heralded incoming guests. I had to blink to get my eyes to focus as Hisahito and Amadahi stepped through.
"You look like shit,"
Shay said to Hisahito. I didn't complain because that was my reaction too. His skin was gray, his hair had been shortened to the middle of his back, and he shook as he walked with a cane.
"It is good to see you too, though I must admit, I have felt better."
His voice was mild, yet I heard the rebuke in it and managed not to laugh. "Sit. Would you like some tea?" I waved at the chair.
"Please,"
he said as he carefully lowered himself into the chair. I made him tea, placing it on the wide arm that formed for him.
"Thank you."
I have to agree with Shay. You look awful, I said, frowning. Amadahi moved over and peered at him. She didn't seem to have changed much. Granted, last time I saw her, I only gave her a cursory glance like I did Shay. But from the woman I'd met more than 6 years ago to now, she seemed the same. Ancient. Long white hair and braids, a wrinkled apple face, and sharp eyes that looked like they were lasers. I agree. You look most unwell. Did they replace the heart? Her voice was huskier than I remembered, but if that was true, or just my memory being faulty, who knew? I turned to look for her familiar. Kachil something. There, he sat on one of the trees, a huge branch supporting what was undoubtedly a significant amount of weight.
No, but I have 2 new valves, and my leg offered up 2 veins. But that is what we need to talk about.
His voice wasn't ponderous, but I could tell he was exhausted already. Amadahi, would you like something to eat or drink? I figured liquid would be needed for this conversation. I'd even hidden a bottle of whiskey if it got too heavy. She accepted lemonade, and I set out the bowl of berries for Georgas, then settled back down. Caroline sprawled at my feet. Why don't I go first? Then we'll see if the information I tell you changes anything. They all gave me sudden wary glances, and I shrugged. I assume all of you are aware of the rips that are occurring worldwide? Shay and Hisahito nodded. Amadahi looked confused. There are rips to the plains happening randomly all over the world, and creatures and beings are slipping in if they aren't closed fast enough. I've been invited to a task force meeting regarding them next week, but for now, that is about all I know. I tilted my head, focused on the AIN member. You aren't seeing these in your lands? She shook her head. No, or at least not that I have been informed of, though in comparison our lands are very small. Do you have numbers and places? Not yet. Probably Monday. She simply nodded her assent, and I continued. But what I really wanted to talk about was both what Brick said and what I was told. I'm sure you sensed that Esmere and Turin had information to impart.
Yes, but neither of them would tell us, which frankly I found a bit odd. All of them, they treat us with the most equality, or maybe more accurately, the least amount of disdain.
Shay said, his tone sour. I heaved a sigh. I wasn't sure I still understood all of this. Part of it has to do with me being the Herald of Magic. All 3 of them stared at me. I mentioned that, right? They shook their heads in unison. It was creepy. Fine, though I don't know what difference it makes. The denizens think I'm the Herald of Magic, but as far as I can tell, other than me being a double Merlin, it doesn't change anything. I stumbled over that, and Shay shot me a look. Okay, fine, a full Merlin, I muttered.
And what does calling yourself a full Merlin entail?
Hisahito asked slowly. I wiggled my shoulders to try to relax a bit. That I emerged again, and now I'm strong and everything. And I am not telling the OMO. They just blinked at me. Shay broke the silence with a soft,
well, Merlin's balls.
Whatever. The important part is the realms are bursting with magic, and that magic is ripping portals and spilling onto Earth. I said as fast as I could to get them off of me and the stupid herald business. This caused them all to sharpen and look at me, but I continued, trying to lay everything out logically. Brix has something against me, or believes in me, or something, and believes that I am the key to dealing with it, but didn't want me told. Brix made the counselors promise to not tell me. Esmere only agreed because Bob required her to. I saw the questions and just waved them off. Assume fealty-like requirements and leave it at that. But Turin said no and came to talk to me. She said I'm a full magic user, and even all the denizens are only full in their realm. I have them all, and that means I'm the only one with a chance of repairing the rips. I took a gulp of my lemonade after that spiel. The 3 of them sat back, just watching me.
Exactly how do you plan on repairing the rips?
Amadahi asked slowly. I don't have a clue, but no one seems to have any idea. But since I'm the Herald, they think I'll figure it out. But this is also what they have been purposefully keeping from you. And it makes me worry there are other things they are not telling you.
Wait, what?
Shay said, sitting up, all signs of relaxation gone.
They're specifically not telling us things? They are treating you like bright pets.
We all jumped at Jorgaz's voice, and I snapped my attention to him. I'd pretty much forgotten he was there.
Explain,
Shay snapped out, staring at the phoenix. Jorgaz lifted his head and trilled out something that was unmistakably laughter.
Humans have assumed for centuries that we are dumb creatures. Why is it so surprising that many in the realms think the same of humans?
Shay sputtered.
But because we aren't. We have tools, use magic, have gone to the moon.
His level of outrage amused me, but Jorgaz's comment didn't really surprise me.
So, we have towns, arts, councils. We can read and understand your legal systems, and yet you still tend to think we are creatures. Most of the councillors haven't dealt with humans in centuries, if ever. They still believe you're talking monkeys, except some of the simians get very insulted with that analogy.
Amadahi looked thoughtful, while Shay still looked insulted on everyone's behalf.
I am a perfect example,
Caroline commented.
No one expected me to be accepted as a person. Esmere warned me multiple times that humans never treated anyone as equals. They even treated each other as less than them, based on magic, skin color, height, gender. She tried very hard to convince me to not become a focus.
He lifted up his head and licked my hand lightly.
Cori proved them all wrong, which has brought Esmir and Turin here. She and those she calls family have never treated us as anything other than persons. Even our children understand that implicitly. But if I had never taken the risk, neither would have the council.
His words fell with the impact of small asteroids. All I could think was, how could anyone not see they were people? But then I'd received enough abuse in my life to know what he said wasn't wrong. Shay sighed.
Point. How do we change that?
By doing what we are doing, creating relationships and talking to everyone. We have been too insular.
It was Amadahi, and I glanced at her with a brow arched. A smile cracked the weathered face.
And yes, I am well aware of the irony in a so-called AIN member saying this. So basically, we need to talk to more counselors, and not just about what the topic is.
The sarcasm on AIN was almost enough to make me smile.
That sounds like a good idea, but you will need to do it without me,
Hisahito put in, his voice weighted with exhaustion.
I'm resigning effective immediately.
Shay sighed.
I figured. Mainly 'cause you still look like shit. Jorgaz, don't your tears heal or something?
The phoenix in question flipped his tail at Shay.
I am not, nor have I ever been, that sort of phoenix.
Wait, I heard that before. Tearsuckers. The comment was in reference to bricks. What does that mean? Why is there a difference? I asked, following a random comment. Jorgaz huffed.
It had to do with what I wanted to talk to you about. But the short answer is no. My tears cannot heal. Bricks don't heal exactly. They just stop and can reverse age-related effects, not repair active damage done to the body. Think about rewinding cell decay, not preventing fat from clogging arteries, though I do not believe Bricks has shed tears in decades or centuries. So, immortality?
Shay asked, though he didn't look excited. more thoughtful. From old age, yes, not from disease or violence. Be that as it may, we still will need a replacement for Hisahiro, and I myself will be stepping down in the next year. But I, at least, have been grooming a replacement, Amadahi said. Her sharp eyes turned to Hisahiro. Do you have any suggestions? I'm not sure that is even a question. It has to be Cori. I snorted the lemonade out of my nose, then hissed in pain. Lemon juice in your sinuses burns. While Shay snickered, and Amadahi and Hisahiro just stared at me, I cleaned up. No, I don't want to. Besides, I countered, a bit desperate. At least one person shouldn't be from this continent. I don't know anything about other nations, much less have that sort of view on how magic is treated in other countries. They just stared at me, and I stared back. I'm not doing it, I protested. Chapter 13. Big news, ladies. Scott Randolph has officially moved to Rockway. If you are looking for a handsome man to spend your affections on, you won't find better. In his 60s, he is still single, and with a huge dog-like familiar, you know you would be safe. Hopefully, you will find reasons to stay in Rockway. Gossip section of Rockway newspaper. It had been a busy weekend, starting the ball rolling on moving 2 households and creating 2 new dryads. The kids were reluctantly leaving the Quetzos, but they had gorged again that morning and would probably sleep for a few hours. Right now, they still enjoyed the warm sand, and Hamadia would keep an eye on them. Dressed in jeans, a tank top, overshirt, and boots, I stepped to DC. Part of my outfit was a jab at Steven from the early days, but mostly it was because I was done dressing the way other people wanted. This was comfortable, and I could move in it if I needed to. Caroleon wore his harness, just in case, though I didn't pull out his leash. I didn't know who to expect here, and freedom of movement was always a good thing. I'd marked out a place to step to years ago, and Steven had verified he was running this task force out of the same building. I walked up to the guard. It felt odd to not have a badge. Instead, I provided my ID.
You check out? What about the animal?
The guard, an older Asian man, glared at Caroleon. He comes with me, I said mildly, though I really wanted to sigh. There'd been a thread on the House of Emrys board a few years ago about identification cards for our familiars. I might have to revisit that and see if I could help get it passed.
He isn't on the list?
The man was stubborn, I had to admit. I just stared at him. Then maybe you should call and verify. He glared back, but I didn't care. My days of explaining myself or being intimidated had faded to almost non-existent after surviving a plane crash and giving birth. With a mutinous frown, he picked up the phone, still watching us as if he expected me to pull a weapon and start firing. I wanted to sigh. I was a Merlin. A gun was the last thing I'd depend on.
Mr. Alexan, there's a lady here and she's on the list. But she's got a vicious-looking animal with her, and she says it goes with her.
Caroleon practically preened at the vicious animal part, but I couldn't really argue for all that he was often more of my security blanket than guard dog. The guard flinched, and Caroleon smirked. He could easily hear both sides of most phone conversations. I didn't need to ask. I knew Steven well enough to guess at the lamb-basting this guard was getting.
Yes, sir, Mr. Alexan. Right away, sir.
He was almost stammering, and I fought to keep my amusement to myself. He hung up the phone abruptly and typed fast. A minute later, he shoved 2 badges towards me.
Here are passes for both of you. He said to meet him on floor 2.
Thank you, I said as I took the 2 visitor badges, clipping one on me and the other on Caroleon's harness. He managed to keep his snark in until we reached the elevators.
You are nicer than I, though his estimation of a vicious creature was accurate.
I figured Steven would solve the problem, and if not, we could go for a hike. Caroline flicked an ear at me.
Now I wish you had gotten mad and left in a huff. The mountains are always more interesting than a man-made building.
I rubbed his ears. I agree, but if this has anything to do with what Turin talked about, I don't think I can afford to not come. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped in with a sigh.
Ah, truth. Will we ever have time to just live?
My hand sunk into his fur as I didn't have an answer for his question. Moments later, the door whispered open to reveal Alaskan standing there. As usual, he was in a suit, though I noted he'd dropped the tie. Steven arched a brow at my attire, and I gave him a huge grin as we stepped out. "Good morning. Exciting so far?" He snorted.
Idiots. Denying a Merlin her familiar because it's scary. You'd think they'd realize a Merlin is much scarier than a familiar, even Caroline.
You just respect my queen and understand death can hide in plain sight,
Caroline said with pleasure.
When she finally decides to hunt, it will be glorious.
I am not hunting anything, I said, exasperated. Lately, Alaskan and Caroline had a weird pissing contest going on, and I couldn't quite figure it out. It was polite and always talked me up. It landed somewhere between embarrassing and exasperating.
Oh, I hope you are. Rips to be exact. Come on, I have people waiting.
He pivoted on one foot, his hair in a long, simple braid, but it only went past his shoulders, not further from where it had been 2 months ago. He led me into a small auditorium, and I gritted my teeth. I'd expected a conference room with a few people, not an auditorium with at least 30, plus a back wall of video connections with faces watching me as we walked in.
Take a seat there, Cori. I need to get this going.
He waved to a row of chairs with 2 other people in them at the back of the stage.
I couldn't get Charles for this, but I'm pulling him in later. Right now, just roll with it.
I gave him my best, "I will get you for this" look, but he ignored me and walked over to the podium. Trying to not growl, I headed to the chairs. Caroline paced beside me, his alert state much higher than it had been about 2 minutes ago. One of the chairs held an older black man in a dress uniform with 2 little stars on his collar. I thought it was Army, but it might have been Marines. The green gave me that much information, as I was sure Navy was white and Air Force was blue. He assessed me in a quick, seeking glance, eyes lingering on my temple for a moment, then did the same with Caroline. A nod, more to himself than us, and he shifted his focus to Alaskan.
Everyone take a seat. We have everyone here. I'll start in a moment.
The other person was a tall, thin man, with skin so pale I could see every place to stick an IV. His hair was the whitish blonde that suggested no pigments. He had on dark sunglasses. His hand was wrapped around a computer, and next to him hung a collapsed cane. Neither were mages, and I was pretty sure the blonde suffered from albinism and was probably functionally blind. I nodded to both of them and took a seat, leaving a chair between us. Caroline sat in the gap between us, both a guard and a warning. I tuned into Steven as I needed to figure out what I'd been suckered into.
Thank you everyone for coming. I know this is high importance for many of our agencies. As such, I have a few experts here to talk about what is going on and what we can do to help.
He glanced down at his notes, and I took a moment to try to peer past the lights into the rows of people. There were a lot of first responders, a few military, and a bunch of mages. But what was I an expert on?
The first person I'd like to invite up is Joel Flansky. He is an expert on the amount of magic coming out of the rips and the frequency they are occurring. Joel?
Steven turned and looked at the man sitting next to us. With a jerky nod, the man rose, leaving his cane at the chair and carefully pacing toward the podium, hand grabbing it as he got close. Steven had moved directly out of the way, a bit of a fumble with the wires at the podium, but then his computer was connected. A graph appeared on the screen behind him, and I craned to see it. It was a graph of blue dots spaced out, but slowly climbing up as it went down the x-axis. The title said, Power Output of Portals. I leaned forward, interest spiking.
I am Joel Flansky, data analyst for the OMO. Whenever portals are found, we check the sensors in the local area. We then, using existing algorithms for power output degradation based on distance, calculate the estimated magic that is leaking from the rips.
I'm not sure what surprised me more, that OMO had the ability to calculate that, or that they were publicly sharing this information.
As you can see, there is a significant growth over the last month.
The little mouse circled an area on the screen.
So far, there have been 63 verified rips.
That number was larger than I thought, but much smaller than I had feared.
In the United States alone.
Shit.
If we include the data from the other countries, a larger standard deviation also appears due to lower quality monitoring stations, and the data becomes fuzzier.
He clicked another button, and the screen changed with a lot more dots, green this time, all ramping upward.
However, as you can see, there is a steady increase. To correlate with that, the numbers of emergencies in these areas have also spiked.
Another tap of the keys, and a new scatter graph, this one with black dots, appeared.
As you can see, the emergencies have spiked, and when we account for geographic areas, they align almost perfectly with rips.
There was murmuring in the crowd, and I reminded myself to never mention the double emergencies that could happen around rips. But there hadn't been death, and the rips had been to a single realm, not multiples, which I knew was a factor in reemerging.
At the rate the rips are going, assuming they remain consistent, we will have rips appearing at the rate of 3 an hour per continent, roughly in the next 6 months.
A gasp went through the room.
A commensurate rate of emergencies is expected. This means that if these rips continue unbated, mages will no longer make up only 35% of the population. By the end of 2 years, they will be over 50%.
His blunt voice held no emotions, providing only facts. He cleared his throat.
All of this is based on interpretation of existing data and may change when new data is added.
Not waiting for questions, he snapped the laptop closed, unplugged it, and all but made a frantic dash back to his chair, collapsing in it and shaking. Steven walked back to the podium, though I knew him enough to realize he'd expected Joel to stay for questions. But the man shook as he sat there, looking damn near pitiful.
Thank you, Joel, for that data. As you can see, this is growing into a bigger issue. However, if it was just the rips and the increase in emergencies, we would not be here. I would like to introduce General Matthew Stone to discuss the next issue.
Steven stepped back and glanced over at us, and I tried to kill him with my glare. It didn't work. The military officer got up and marched toward the podium. The difference between the two men was like looking at a reversed prism. One stoic and dark, the other light and frazzled. I shook my head and focused on the general.
As Mr. Election said, I'm General Stone. I oversee all the groups that responded to magical events, including Rogue Hunters, Mage Seal, and all unsanctioned breaches over 2 feet in width. The reason for that is micro or very small rips occur daily all over the world, and 99% of the time, people are unaware they exist, and they tend to close naturally, or a mage will sense them and just close them without much thought.
He nodded toward the screen.
I don't have pretty pictures to convince you of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm sure you've been following the news. Or at least if you haven't, I'm not sure why you're here.
There was a low-level chuckle around the room at that.
Many of the rips are large enough to let creatures slip through, while some are unremarkable. A great many of them are deadly, vicious, and capable of treating humans as snacks.
I winced a bit, but I couldn't really argue with that.
We so far have had to stop, and by stop I mean kill with great prejudice, what appear to match these creatures. Naga, manticore, Venus flytrap, snakes, boar, deer, and rats.
He lifted his head from the notes he had been reading from.
I don't want you to think this is an overreaction. The snake was over 30 feet long and moved at the rate of 20 miles an hour. Each of the rats were over 50 pounds and had killed 2 people before we got to them. The Naga and the Manticore were intelligent, and it took 3 rogue mage teams to bring them down. I would like to state we did ask them to surrender peacefully, and we'd have opened a portal for them back to the appropriate plane. They declined, with comments similar to, "Humans are tasty, and this is more entertainment than I've ever had in years."
He cleared his throat.
If this phenomenon is not stopped quickly, we may have creatures we cannot stop slip through and treat Earth as their hunting grounds, and this is only what my teams have dealt with. I have no idea what might have slipped out in other countries. Any questions?
There was a general murmur in the room, and a few questions about what the creatures were and how had they been stopped. What sort of warning should be sent out? Discussion about whom to contact and how. Meanwhile, I raced, trying to figure out what to do next. How biased was my view of the denizens?
Thank you, General Stone. Next, we have Cori Munroe to talk about the creatures and what can be done to help prevent from killing and get the rips closed sooner. Cori?
Steven turned and looked at me, and I tried to decide if I was going to feed him to Zmog or Esmere. Chapter 14. Senior government officials have been pulled into a meeting over in Langley, and no one will say what is going on. The president and his staff are not saying anything, but certain key individuals are missing today. Those in the know are worried there is more going on than anyone realizes. How dangerous are these rips? House of Emrys Politics Board. I stopped a few feet away from the podium next to Steven. I'm going to get you back for this. And what exactly am I supposed to say? I whispered fiercely. He sighed and dragged his hands over his face, looking exhausted.
Yes, you are. And Indira is going to help you. I am sorry, but I'm trapped as badly as you are, and really all of this was dropped on me last night. I didn't have much time to warn you. Talk to them about the denizens and how to work with the creatures that come out, and how to close the rips. You might have to pull the power move to get them to listen. Regardless of what you think, most people have no idea what a double Merlin is or who you are.
He grimaced as the sound of people getting restless was clear.
I swear the president is calling me 3 times a day asking what the plan is, and no one has one.
If he hadn't looked so exhausted, I might have had less sympathy. You still could have called.
And told you what? You would have refused to come, and then it would have been even worse.
There was something else going on here, but I didn't have time to figure it out. I approached the podium and stared out at the people. I knew there were truth sensors out here, so this would all be a dance to tell the truth. I'm Cori Munroe. The last time I was tested, the OMO registered me as a double Merlin. This means magic has a very low cost for me. Then, when you add in my focus, Caerleon, it means the cost is even less. I petted him gently as I spoke. He sat on the side of the podium, looking regal and deadly. I could see people staring at me, trying to analyze exactly why I was there. If they figured it out, I hoped they would tell me. Time to dance. Many people are unaware that I count some of the realm denizens as friends. Not only my focus, but his mother, the Gorgon Tursane, and others. Because of this, I have greater insight into some of the dynamics at play in the realms. First, some of the beings are aware of these rips. I practically heard Steven jerk upright when I said this. But at this time, they have not disclosed to me exactly how they can be closed. Also, there is a wide range of beings that make up the realms. On this part, I was on much firmer ground, though I'd kill for a glass of water right now. Some are smarter than humans. Others are nothing more than animals. As General Stone relayed, they are capable of talking and making decisions. However, their view on life is different from ours. For the most part, few humans would ever think of hunting and eating another human, both because of the taboo of cannibalism, but also the idea of eating a sentient creature. Many of the realm denizens do not feel this way. They believe in the survival of the fittest, and that an intelligent, slow creature tastes just as good as a fast, stupid animal. The sound of shock that rippled through the room had me shaking my head. We really were the most arrogant creatures. There are some that do not regard humans as prey, but I couldn't tell you for sure how many that is. I suspected the answer was 5, or maybe less. I still didn't know if Zmog or Onyx would eat me. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. I ignored it. Now wasn't a good time to see what Joe and Sable wanted for dinner. Part of the reason the rips to the realms are so strong is they are places where the magic is so high, the reality dividing our realms is ripping. As I've been able to figure out, it is the equivalent of a bubble bursting. My phone was still buzzing, and I gritted my teeth. Can you tell Joe and Sable I'll respond in a bit?
Of course.
Other than that, I know they can be closed. Anyone with spirit can close a rip, but because they are large and basically being fueled by magic, they are more difficult to close than most. I cleared my throat, out of things to say. I didn't want to say I'd been tasked with closing them, or it was technically my fault for feeding Tursane so much magic. With luck, I'd never have to mention that. What else would you like to know? I hoped they'd make it short.
Joe and Sable said neither of them are trying to contact you, and the kids are fine.
I frowned at this information, but I couldn't focus in on who could be calling or texting me as the room seemed full of hands. I pointed at someone at random. You're sure this isn't an invasion? Most of the monsters coming through are overly aggressive. It was part question, part accusation. If it is an invasion, I don't know about it, and no one has mentioned it. As to the overly aggressive, their world isn't as nice or stable as ours. They have to be aggressive to survive, even with the magic. Remember what I said about everyone being prey? To live, you are stronger, faster, smarter than what is hunting you. You, I said, jabbing at someone else. The darkness of the auditorium made it hard to see who people were. How intelligent is intelligent? I shrugged. They are absolutely smarter than most of the politicians I've met. You decide. A snort of laughter rippled through the room. Another finger jab from me.
Can we stop them? Can they? Do they want to?
A man's voice, but more curious than accusatory. The rips? As far as I know, the method to stopping them is unknown. Do they want this? I shrugged. I don't think so. But again, what I think and what they actually want may not be the same. You. My finger jabbed, eager to move on.
Why aren't you stopping this? You're supposed to be, uber powerful?
I wasn't sure who had asked that question, but I couldn't stop the snort. If you figure out how I can do that, please tell me, and I'd be delighted to stop them. Another question that just rehashed the answers I'd already given. Is there anything else that I haven't answered? There were shakes of heads, and it felt like it had taken forever, but probably less than 10 minutes. I started to step back to let Steven back up, though I still had no idea what we could do besides rush to close them as soon as they appeared. He started to walk toward me when I felt a spike of pain, and I pivoted, seeking the source. It made no sense. Why would a rip randomly happen here, of all places? The wavering distortion of reality appeared in the middle of the stage, and then Esmere stepped out of it. I sagged in relief, then went tense, even as most everyone around us screamed. My feet were moving before my brain had caught up. Esmere, is everything okay? Why are you here? Her popping into my world like this had never happened before. Usually, she only showed up at home. Already I could see flashes of camera phones going off as she stalked across the stage, her green fur sparkling in the light. Herald Munroe, the other counselors have been trying to get a hold of you. You must come. Her voice was imperative, and Caroline was at my side. His hackles weren't raised. What she called me clicked in. Lord Esmere, I apologize, but I have other duties today. May I attend another time? I kept my tone as formal as I could while cataloging all the things that were wrong about this. Her tail was lashing, her pupils were pinpricks, and the reactions of everyone around us didn't help. She was my friend, Caroline's mom, and sometimes I forgot that she was also terrifying. She was the size of a small horse and took up a significant amount of space on the stage. I could see Joel behind her, laptop grasped across his chest so tight it might crack if he wasn't careful. There is an emergency session. The Herald is directed to attend. There was a level of formality in her voice that made no sense and set off all my alarms. Her voice wasn't projecting to everyone, so the odds were it looked like me facing down a giant green cat. The media was going to have a field day with that. I turned to look at Steven, who stood a few feet away from me, eyes narrowed as he watched us. I'm afraid I need to step away. Please make sure to send me the details on how I can help. You know I will assist as needed. His face was a shuttered mask, and I gave him a hard look. I would be calling him tonight. If I had to, I'd enlist Indira in the fight. This wasn't acceptable. He nodded, just the teeniest bit. Then I shall leave with you, Lord Esmere. Caroline, will you attend? The formal phrasing sounded ridiculous. Rather than responding, he did a sort of bow I don't believe I'd ever seen before. One leg extended, the other pulled back, and he stretched out his head and neck over the extended leg. If it had been any other situation, I might have been pestering him nonstop about what that meant. Right now, I just nodded and moved with Esmere to step through the rip.
Stop right there, young lady.
The barked order made me stumble as I tried to turn and walk at the same time. I regained my footing and turned to see General Stone storming towards us.
What do you think you're doing? Leaving with this creature? You should hold it captive here until they stop letting their trash into our world.
His chest heaved as he shouted into my face. Caroline snarled and moved forward, but I put my hand on his head. General, may I introduce you to Lord Esmere? I waved my hand to her. Lord Esmere, this is General Stone. She had sat down, tail wrapping around her feet. General? Her voice whispered across my mind. You are delaying us from a required appearance. I heard the warning and wondered once again what was driving her. He jerked back and glared at me.
What is it with this talking in my head nonsense? I know animals can't talk.
My mouth opened, closed, then I took a deep breath. General, this is Lord Esmir. I can guarantee you that she is at least as intelligent as you, if not more, as she isn't the one insulting someone who has claws that are almost 5 inches long and can cut through a picnic table like it is styrofoam. To back up my words, Esmir lifted one paw and extended her lethally sharp claws, then dug them into the floor, carving up strips. Now, I would advise you to treat her with the same level of respect you would a Merlin from Russia or Germany, because I can guarantee you, if she was to kill you, where you stand, there isn't a force in the world that would be able to put her on trial for removing an idiot from Earth's population. My words almost echoed in the auditorium, and then Caroline just had to chime in as he licked his claws.
I have heard that humans taste excellent with the extra flavoring adrenaline adds to the meat. I bet I could convince Lord Esmir to help me chase you for a bit. Make sure the chemicals are fully flushed through all your muscles.
I wanted to groan, but I managed to keep a straight face as the man paled to an unhealthy color of gray. What caught my eye was Joel, still in the chair, laptop held to his chest and a hand across his mouth. It wasn't fear I saw, but laughter. I flicked my eyes away before I lost it and fell into howls of laughter to match. Mr. Alexant, why don't you explain to the general exactly who he is insulting, and I will go to the meeting where I am needed. Just to put the fear of me into everyone, as I still heard rumblings and the occasional squeak of terror, I held up one hand and pulled out one of the showier bits of power Joe, Sable, and I created for the kids. A column of flame and water twisted and weaved in the palm of my hand. It was hypnotic. Fire and water thought it was great fun to dance with each other and never touch. I stared right in the general's eyes as the magic danced on my palm. Until later, I said with a smile, and then through the 2 columns on the floor, where they twisted and danced their way through the rip. The 3 of us followed them through, not even casting a backward glance at the freaked-out humans.